The story begins with a pink-haired girl angrily and forcefully swinging a pickaxe against a rock, loudly questioning how much longer she must continue this hard labor. This girl, named Lydia Ivancheva, was once a successful young woman from a Marquise family, but is now a prisoner in a labor camp. Lydia continues to work hard, realizing that people describe her as a woman who ruined her own destiny due to her madness for a man, and she admits to herself that she was once so obsessed with him she couldn't tell fire from water. Lydia recalls her memories with Richard, the man she loved to death and the direct cause of her tragic end. She wipes the sweat from her face, painfully blaming herself for falling in love with him just because he comforted her when she was crying, describing herself as the biggest fool. Richard was the third prince, born to a commoner mother, living under the threat and surveillance of the crown prince, which made him the worst marriage prospect at the time. Despite this, out of naivety and overconfidence in her family's influence, Lydia proposed to him. While everyone looked at her in surprise, calling her a madwoman, he was overjoyed by his engagement to Lydia, which also allowed Richard to survive the power struggle for the throne. When the crown prince ascended the throne and ruled with tyranny, Richard seized the opportunity to start a rebellion, eventually being crowned emperor amidst the cheers of the people. Shockingly, Richard abandoned Lydia and fell in love with her cousin, Giselle. If it had been merely a matter of love between them, Lydia might have remained silent, but their betrayal went far beyond that. Drowning in tears and despair, Lydia decided she had to kill Giselle. Driven by blind love, she attempted to poison her, believing that losing Giselle would be the greatest punishment for Richard. The poisoning attempt failed, and as a result, Lydia was exiled to the labor camp, where she now collapses on the ground from exhaustion. She harshly blames herself for not killing that traitor, Richard. Lydia, no longer trying to kill Giselle, worries that the continuous work will destroy her health and decides to rest for a moment. However, she is horrified to find herself coughing up a large amount of blood. After spending 5 years in a labor camp, Lydia passes out, cursing her miserable fate. Lydia had contracted a deadly plague, which slowly ended her life as her soul gradually faded away. The tape of her life plays before her eyes like a movie. Lydia sees the scene of her engagement to Richard, wondering in confusion if this is her final moment. Watching herself foolishly begging him, she feels intense shame and screams for the disgraceful scene to stop. Pain and regret grip Lydia's heart, and she wishes time could return to that moment, so she could slap that idiot across the face. Suddenly, she hears a voice calling her name, Lydia Ivancheva, only to find herself restored to her young, neat appearance. She looks around in confusion, trying to understand what is happening, only to be shocked to see Richard standing before her, yelling angrily in her face, accusing her of smuggling poison based on a report he received. Richard accuses Lydia to her face of attempting to poison Giselle. Lydia freezes, staring at the poison vial in her hand, unable to comprehend what is happening. She suddenly realizes she has traveled back to the past, specifically to the moment she was arrested for the poisoning attempt. She examines the bottle in shock. Lydia thinks in disbelief. Had she really returned to this ominous day? And she feels angry at the terrible timing, thinking it would have been better to return even just before committing this foolish act. Richard roars in anger, ordering the guards to immediately search her as she remains silent. But Giselle interrupts him, firmly refusing to let any man touch Lydia and announcing she will conduct the search herself. This surprises Richard. Lydia's gaze falls on Giselle, and she sees Richard shielding Giselle behind him, claiming it's out of concern for her sake and to understand her heart. Lydia feels utterly disgusted by the emotional hypocrisy before her. As Giselle anxiously calls out to the emperor, Lydia decides she did not return to witness this farce again. Although the timing of her return is both mysterious and terrible, she sees it as a chance to correct her past mistakes. To Richard's surprise, Lydia raises her hand and slaps herself across the face as Richard calls out her name. Wondering in shock what on earth she is doing, Lydia smiles confidently, declaring internally that she has finally regained her senses and will never again ruin her life for a man. Richard loudly reprimands her for her actions, and Lydia realizes that a body search will inevitably reveal the poison. She decides to cleverly turn the tables, claiming with false tears that the poison was not to kill Giselle, but for her own suicide, thus changing the direction of the accusation. Everyone is stunned by her declaration. and Lydia thinks that self-harm is not a crime. And since rumors of her obsession with a man have always followed her, she will play the victim who commits suicide because her fiancé was stolen. Lydia imagines the scenario of her death and how it would put Richard in a huge predicament, as the cause of death would be seen as the betrayal of a lover. People would talk about how he abandoned his former fiancée to her death, despite his debt to her family, and how he would face Marquis Ivancheva afterward. She realizes his reputation would crumble, and to avoid an eternal curse, he would surely try to stop her. It would haunt him forever. Lydia begins to execute her plan, pretending to drink the poison in front of everyone. Richard immediately orders her arrest, and as the guards rush toward her, the liquid spills. Lydia panics as she realizes a few drops of poison have entered her mouth, and she has accidentally swallowed them. Just then, a duke bursts into the room, apologizing for his sudden intrusion after receiving no response. But he freezes in place, shocked to see the Marquis's daughter in such a state. Blood flows from Lydia's mouth, and she looks at the Duke in surprise. As she recognizes his features, Lydia stumbles, whispering Arson's name and murmuring his family name, Byron, before losing her balance and falling into his arms. Arson's eyes widen in utter shock as Lydia's exhausted body collapses into his arms, not just because of her sudden collapse, but because she had just whispered his original and secret family name, Byron. Arson wonders in confusion how she could possibly know that name. Just then, his soldiers rush onto the scene, anxiously calling for their commander. The soldiers are very surprised to see this scene, curiously asking if the young lady had just called him by his first name, Arson, leading them to speculate about a secret romance between the two. Arson breathes a sigh of relief internally as no one heard the word Byron, and he coldly denies the romance rumors, ordering them to summon a doctor immediately instead of gossiping about trivial matters. Arson stares at the unconscious Lydia's face, a question still swirling in his mind. How did this woman know that dangerous name? Meanwhile, rumors spread like wildfire. Servants in the hallways talk about the affectionate gaze Lydia gave Arson during her suicide attempt and how he personally caught her as she fell. Gossip grows about them being secret lovers, which might be the real reason Arson was previously uninterested in women. Arson Edis is the commander of the Black Wolf Knights and the Empire's strongest knight, the one most credited for the success of Richard's rebellion. Although the idea of him falling for the Emperor's former fiancée is strange, the rumors don't stop while Lydia lies in her room. Arson sits by her side in the room, watching her with a serious expression, aware that his presence here will intensify the endless rumors he wants to avoid. But he finds himself unable to escape. Figuring out why she uttered the name Byron and eliminating any potential threats is far more important than any rumor. The name Byron belongs to a ducal family that was executed for treason and completely wiped out. It is his true title that must never see the light of day, and painful childhood memories of escaping through a sea of fiery surface. Lydia's groans and the feeling of cold interrupt his thoughts. Arson is surprised by the absence of servants in the house and their neglect of the patient, finding himself forced to personally care for her and light the fireplace to warm her up. He helplessly puts his hand on his face, wondering what on earth he is doing. He came here to monitor and investigate her, but ended up taking care of her. As the fire grows stronger, Lydia slowly opens her eyes. In a weak voice, she asks for water, feeling extremely thirsty. Arson approaches her and coldly asks if she is awake. Lydia is surprised by his presence in her room, while he advises her to get up slowly as her condition is still unstable. She privately wonders why this man is here. She stammers her thanks, to which he replies with veiled sarcasm that she is lucky to have survived and woken up so quickly after taking poison. Lydia drinks the water, thinking how she miraculously survived, as she truly thought she would die from the poison immediately after returning to the past. Lydia clutches the blanket tightly, determined to live her new life correctly this time, for she has returned from the dead. She sets the first rule for her new life: never become obsessed with a man and seek powerful allies. She sets her first plan to rescue the people in the labor camp where she had suffered, and the second plan is to get revenge on Richard and Giselle, imagining herself punching Richard hard. Lydia smiles slyly, realizing that meeting Arson right away is an incredible stroke of luck, as he is exactly the person she needs to achieve her goals. She feigns innocence, asking him why he is there, while internally planning to use her knowledge of his benefactors being in the labor camp to persuade him or threaten him with his dangerous secret if he refuses to cooperate. Arson seriously asks Lydia if she remembers what happened yesterday, so she feigns ignorance, asking in surprise, but he directly confronts her about calling him Byron, which shocks and surprises her. Lydia tries to salvage the situation with a nervous smile, claiming she might not have said such a thing or that he misheard, but Arson definitively cuts through her doubts, confirming he heard her clearly and that he has been up all night searching for the reason. He stares at her with a sharp and piercing gaze, demanding an explanation for why she called him Arson Byron. Lydia feels anxious internally, nervously grabbing her hair, realizing that trying to cover it up with a lie will only destroy his trust in her. She decides to risk telling the truth, hesitantly asking if he would believe her if she told him, to which he coldly replies that he will decide after hearing it. Lydia agrees, takes a deep breath, and asks him not to be shocked by what's coming. He readies himself to hear what she has to say. Lydia drops the bombshell, saying she has actually died once and then traveled back to the past. She explains to him that, in her past life, she died in a labor camp after 5 years of imprisonment, and she has now returned to the moment of her arrest. Arson listens intently, his expression growing more serious as he processes this impossible claim. Lydia continues, explaining that she knows his real name because in her previous life, she learned about his true identity. She tells him that she remembers events that haven't happened yet in this timeline. Arson's eyes narrow as he studies her face, trying to determine if she is lying or truly believes what she is saying. Lydia nervously awaits his response, knowing how insane her story sounds. After a long silence, Arson asks her to prove what she is claiming. Lydia thinks carefully about what she can reveal without endangering him further. She tells him that his soldiers will soon arrive with news of a rebellion plot in the eastern provinces. Arson's expression shifts slightly, showing that she has caught his attention with this specific detail. Lydia continues, describing other events that will occur in the coming weeks and months. She speaks about the Emperor's plans and the movements of various nobles with surprising accuracy. Arson leans back, his mind racing through the implications of what she is telling him. If even a portion of what she says is true, it would change everything about his understanding of the situation. He asks her why she is telling him all of this and what she wants from him. Lydia takes a breath and explains that she needs his help to prevent the suffering she experienced in her previous life. She wants him to help her rescue the people imprisoned in the labor camps. Arson considers her request carefully, weighing the risks and benefits. He asked her how she knew about his past and his true family name. Lydia explains that in her previous life, she learned of his origins through unfortunate circumstances and connections. She assures him that she has no intention of revealing his secret to anyone. Arson studies her face, searching for any sign of deception. After what feels like an eternity, he finally speaks, saying he will help her. But on one condition, she must prove that her knowledge of future events is real. Lydia agrees to his terms, relieved that he is willing to work with her. Arson stands up and begins to make plans for how they will proceed. He tells her that they must be careful and that no one can know about their partnership. Lydia nods, understanding the gravity of the situation. Over the following days, Lydia provides Arson with information that proves her claims. Events unfold exactly as she predicted, and Arson becomes increasingly convinced of the truth. Together, they begin to formulate a plan to change the course of history. Lydia focuses on preventing her own downfall and seeking revenge on those who wronged her. Arson works to protect his own secrets while helping Lydia achieve her goals. Their alliance grows stronger as they realize how much they can accomplish together. However, they must remain vigilant, as the Emperor and his allies are always watching. Richard begins to notice Lydia's sudden change in behavior and becomes suspicious. He wonders why she no longer seems desperate and obsessed with him as she once was. This shift troubles him, and he questions Giselle about Lydia's mysterious recovery. Giselle suggests that Lydia may have found comfort in someone else, causing Richard's jealousy to flare. Meanwhile, Lydia and Arson continue their secret meetings to plan their next moves. Lydia uses her knowledge of future events to guide their strategy against the Emperor. She warns Arson of dangers that would have befallen him in her previous timeline. Together, they work to prevent those tragedies and strengthen Arson's position. Lydia also begins to distance herself from her family to protect them from the Emperor's wrath. She fears what Richard might do if he learns of her involvement in undermining his rule. Arson assures her that he will protect both her and her family from any retaliation. As time passes, their partnership deepens, and Lydia finds herself developing feelings for Arson. She tries to suppress these emotions, remembering her first rule about not becoming obsessed with a man. However, Arson's loyalty and genuine care for her make it increasingly difficult to maintain emotional distance. One evening, as they discuss their plans, Arson asks Lydia about her life in her previous timeline. She opens up to him about her suffering in the labor camp and her regrets about Richard. Arson listens carefully, his heart aching for what she has endured. He tells her that he will ensure she never has to suffer like that again. Lydia feels a warmth in her chest at his words, realizing that perhaps this second chance at life holds more than just revenge. As their bond strengthens, they face increasing challenges from the Emperor's court. Richard's suspicions grow, and he begins to tighten his control over those around him. Lydia and Arson must become even more careful in their dealings, knowing that discovery would mean certain death. They navigate the treacherous political landscape with cunning and strategy. Lydia uses her intelligence and Arson's military might to outmaneuver their enemies. Together, they slowly turn the tide against Richard's tyrannical rule. The people begin to see hope for a better future under Arson's leadership. Lydia works behind the scenes to secure support from various factions and noble houses. Her knowledge of the future allows her to make strategic alliances that Richard never anticipated. As the final confrontation approaches, Lydia and Arson prepare for the moment when they will challenge the Emperor's authority. She looked at him meaningfully, implying that he still needed her intelligence. Lydia suddenly laughed confidently, telling him that if he wanted to get the Marquis's border territory, he would need her. Arson confidently replied that the young Marquis, Devon, and the Emperor had already promised him that land. Lydia looked at him with pity, telling him with a sarcastic smile that he was surprisingly naive. Arson was shocked and taken aback at being called naive. Lydia continued her logical speech, sarcastically asking if he truly believed that a man who could so easily abandon his fiancée would keep his promise to him. Lydia knew in her heart that she wasn't lying. In fact, in her past life, until the day he died, he had never received that land. Lydia explained that once the young Marquis knew of Arson's desire for the land, he wouldn't give it up for free, and that Devon wanted to keep Arson under his control. She proposed a bold idea. If he married her, the land could be given to him as a dowry. Arson was bewildered by the proposal, but Lydia quickly reassured him that she had no intention of asking him to marry her either. She placed her hand on her chest earnestly, asking for his help and promising to help him in return. Arson looked at her skeptically, tightening the restraints, wondering how she planned to help him when he was the one who knew her secret and wouldn't let her escape easily. Lydia revealed her plan with a cunning smile, saying she would first cure her father's supposedly incurable illness to get him on her side, as Devon had seized power since their father fell ill. Arson asked Lydia how she planned to do it, and she immediately replied that it was a trade secret. Arson looked at her with a face full of questions, unable to comprehend her excessive confidence. Lydia continued methodically, retorting why she would reveal sensitive and free information to someone who had just threatened to kill her. Arson questioned her way of making a deal, and when she again mentioned using her knowledge of the future, Arson looked at her with annoyance, thinking it was nonsense. But Lydia cut him off firmly, pointing out that since he had already found the labor camp, he should believe her words. Arson watched her in silence, realizing that although her words sounded strange, they had an undeniable logic. She clearly knew his identity and seemed to have no intention of exposing him. He thought of the current emperor, and with the blood of the previous emperor running through his own veins, it was nearly impossible to trust anyone. He realized it was foolish to cling to a vague promise. He looked at Lydia, assessing her. In his eyes, she wasn't entirely trustworthy, especially after the absurd rumors of her suicide attempt. Arson finally decided that it was better to keep her by his side under surveillance than to do nothing, so he asked her what she wanted from him. Lydia enthusiastically requested that he take her to the border of the Marquis's territory after rescuing the people from the labor camp. Suddenly, she remembered something important and told him they had to go to the temple first. Arson then sarcastically asked if she was planning to confess her sins. Lydia looked at him with feigned surprise, asking if she looked like someone who needed to confess. Then Lydia dropped another surprise, announcing that she was going to become a priestess. Arson stared at her in shock, unable to believe that someone unwilling to even confess wanted to pursue a divine path. Lydia quickly explained that it was just a disguise to escape the forced marriage. Arson understood the situation and agreed to accompany her to the temple the next day. Lydia smiled in relief, stating that she was counting on him for this mission. Suddenly, Arson tried to wrap her in a blanket, so Lydia reminded him that they were on the same side now and there was no need for restraints. But he averted his gaze and sternly reminded her to pay attention to what she was wearing. Lydia looked down at herself in surprise and answered innocently that she was wearing her nightgown. Arson confirmed this with a meaningful look. He explained to her that there were no suitable women's clothes in the knight's quarters and that he would bring her some in the morning, telling her to sleep here for the night. Lydia asked in surprise if he meant sleeping in his own bedroom. He affirmed it. She laughed nervously, saying she couldn't kick the owner of the room out and suggested the guest room. Arson grabbed her shoulder to stop her, coldly telling her there was no guest room and she had to sleep here. An awkward silence spread between them, and Lydia shyly wondered if they were going to sleep in the same place. Arson looked at her sharply and asked if she was seriously asking that question. Lydia became flustered and tried to salvage the situation, saying she meant no harm, but that with only one bed, various possibilities could arise. She laughed very nervously, trying to reassure herself that she knew nothing would happen and he wouldn't do anything to her. Arson warned Lydia that she needed to be vigilant and raise her sense of security a little. Just as she was looking at him in surprise, he suddenly moved closer to her. He cornered her on the bed and whispered seriously in her ear that it seemed she didn't see him as a man, or she wouldn't be so relaxed in front of him. He asked her how, in a situation like this, she could be so sure he wouldn't harbor ill intentions toward her. Lydia remembered Richard's cruel words, saying no man in the world would desire a woman like her. Her expression turned sad and broken, and she lowered her head. She realized she had taken the joke too far and hurt his feelings. While Arson was confused by her reaction, she immediately apologized to him, explaining that she had no intention of provoking him. Arson wondered in confusion what on earth the Emperor had said to his former fiancée to make her lose so much confidence and feel so unwanted. He explained to her that he wasn't blaming her, but wanted to preemptively warn her of any possibilities that could put her in danger. Arson decided to leave to let her rest for a while, but in the silence, Lydia's stomach let out a loud growl, making her face instantly turn bright red. Lydia awkwardly thought Arson would be noble and ignore the sound, but Arson turned back and asked if she was hungry. Lydia vehemently denied it, but her stomach betrayed her again with an even louder noise, putting her in a very embarrassing situation. Lydia ate the food he brought with a hearty appetite, feeling incredibly happy. Arson watched her eat, a blush rising on her cheeks. He thought with regret that her family must have never fed her properly to make her feel this hungry, even though she still believed she was just being neglected. Arson noticed that the way she chewed her food reminded him of something. He muttered rabbit, and Lydia stopped, wondering if he meant the soup was made of rabbit. Arson clarified that the way she ate resembled a winter rabbit. He explained to her that it was an animal with pink fur from the northern forests, which she would see often if she went to the border. Lydia happily imagined what the cute pink rabbit looked like. Meanwhile, Arson watched her seriously, thinking that raising someone like her in the Imperial Palace would probably be a daunting task. In the Imperial Palace, the doctor confirmed to Giselle that her baby was healthy. But Emperor Richard seemed absent-minded, uninterested in what was being said. Empress Giselle noticed his distraction, so he apologized, saying he was troubled by the relationship between Arson and Lydia. So she asked if he still had lingering feelings for his former fiancée. Richard coldly denied it, explaining that what was important to him was getting Arson on his side. He placed his hand on her belly, revealing that he wanted to do everything possible to keep Arson in the capital as his bodyguard. Richard expressed his concern that a marriage between Arson and Lydia would pose a great threat to him. To solve this problem, Giselle decided to visit the Marquis's residence herself. She planned to understand and control the situation by meeting directly with Devon. Just as Giselle revealed a cunning smile, Lydia woke up the next morning rubbing her sleepy eyes, wondering in surprise if the person knocking was Arson. Another knight appeared before her, making Lydia wonder in surprise about his true identity. The knight coldly told her someone was looking for her outside, and Lydia took the clothes he handed her and thanked him. Lydia noticed his sharp and intimidating gaze, wondering inwardly why he was staring at her like that. The knight sternly told her that the knight commander was not a suitable partner for a young lady like her, and advised her to give up any romantic ideas she might have sooner rather than later. Lydia was stunned by his sudden words, wondering what he meant. The knight continued to mock her, saying she would be better off returning to the emperor, and sarcastically asked if she wasn't married yet. Lydia was furious at his rudeness, thinking how incredibly rude this man was for a first meeting. Lydia angrily asked for his name, and he arrogantly replied that even if he told her, she would forget it immediately, and that hearing the name of a lowly scumbag like him would only pollute her ears. Lydia was so enraged that she screamed, thinking what a provocative person this was. Suddenly, in her imagination, flames of anger erupted around her, while Arson looked at her, wondering why she was staring blankly at the empty hallway. Lydia realized Arson had heard her and hesitated whether to expose the knight. She changed her mind and decided not to say anything, as they were heading to the border together after the temple business, to avoid any awkwardness between them. But she asked Arson why he was here. Arson told her he had sent someone to the Marquis's residence last night, and that they had to hurry to the temple, to which Lydia agreed. Lydia arrived at the temple early in the morning, surprising the priests. Lydia greeted the high priest and, with false piety, announced that she had come as a faithful servant to devote her life to the goddess Anistis. The high priest looked at her skeptically, realizing that making her a priestess would damage the temple's reputation. Lydia continued her dramatic performance, claiming the goddess had made her realize the vanity of life and guided her toward asceticism. The priest was considering rejecting her, but Lydia took out a book, announcing her desire to offer her body in service to the goddess. The priest was shocked when he saw the book. Lydia smiled slyly and opened the book, which contained a huge bribe, declaring it was literally a door knocker to become a priestess. The priest coughed nervously, accepted the bribe, and said the goddess was merciful and would not refuse any sincerity. The priest asked if she knew that the vow of chastity required a witness, and Lydia confidently replied that she had prepared everything and the witness would arrive soon. The priest assured her that not just anyone could be a witness. They had to have the proper qualifications. Lydia smiled confidently and announced that today's witness would be a special person. Just then, the future empress, Giselle, entered the temple. The previous night, Lydia had given a letter to Arson, asking for a favor. She asked him to deliver the letter to Ellis at Baron Melbourne's residence. The letter was a forged invitation requesting Giselle to come to the central temple the next morning to ensure they would be present as witnesses for her vow. Arson seriously asked Lydia if she thought the Empress would really come, and Lydia replied with full confidence that she definitely would. She explained to him that Giselle desperately needed to register her marriage in the Ivancheva family registry before the state wedding, as she was considered a distant orphan, no different from a commoner in the eyes of the nobility, and Richard felt deeply insecure about his mother's commoner origins. She added that her father, the Marquis, was too ill to make decisions, so Giselle needed Lydia's approval to be entered into the family registry. Lydia confirmed with certainty that Giselle would come. Suddenly the door opened, and Giselle appeared gracefully. Lydia stood before her, and Giselle, with a cunning smile, thanked Lydia for the invitation and sarcastically noted that Lydia had chosen a difficult path. Lydia responded with a brilliant but fake smile, expressing her gratitude for Giselle's arrival. Lydia asked if she should use formal language now, which Giselle flatly denied. Giselle explained that she had no intention of putting on airs, and that there was no need for formalities between sisters. Giselle looked at her suspiciously, wondering if Lydia really intended to become a priestess, which would mean there was nothing between her and Arson. Lydia decided to be frank and told Giselle she wouldn't stop her from using the family name, but in exchange, she would not genuinely accept her as a family member. Giselle smiled coldly, telling her that was more than enough for her. The priestess appointment ceremony concluded smoothly under the high priest's supervision. But then a problem suddenly arose as Devin shouted at Lydia, asking in shock what she was planning to do and if she was really going to become a priestess. Lydia coldly confirmed her decision, announcing that from now on, she would live according to the goddess's teachings. Devin scoffed at her words, but she cut him off, telling him she was going to the border with Arson to build a temple there. Devin was shocked to hear this and asked if Arson had agreed. Arson confirmed that he had agreed to serve Lydia and accompany her. Devin was stunned, unable to believe Arson would go to the border with Lydia, a priestess. Devin began to suspect a hidden affection between them, wondering if Arson was in love with Lydia, even though she had no feelings for him. Devin reluctantly agreed, saying that as long as Arson consented, he had no reason to object. Lydia beamed with a blissfully happy smile, while Devin thought she could leave the priesthood later and that what mattered now was for Lydia and Arson to fall in love. Devin smiled cunningly, anticipating that Lydia would come to rely on Arson when faced with the hardships of life on the border. Suddenly, Devin warned her in a threatening tone not to take anything from the residents. This shocked Lydia. Devin coldly told her that she was a priestess now and had to live an ascetic life, so she should only take a few simple clothes. Devin stood up and left, leaving Lydia trembling with anger, cursing him for being despicable. Devin invited Arson for tea, which Arson tried to refuse, but Devin insisted. Devin apologized to Arson for his earlier rudeness and curiously asked when he had become so close to Lydia. Arson denied their closeness, explaining that he thought it was a good thing to build a temple on the border where there was none. Devin sipped his tea, thinking sarcastically about Arson's excessive seriousness, and then he suddenly asked with a malicious smile for his opinion on his sister Lydia's beauty. Devin warned Arson that Lydia might face unwanted advances abroad, and asked him to take good care of her. Devin smiled cunningly, implying that if she felt lonely, Arson should be the first to comfort her, and asked who else she could rely on. Arson replied that someone might get the wrong idea if they heard him say that. Devin laughed, praising Arson as a noble man and saying that was why he admired him. Arson watched Devin in silence, realizing the man was actually selling out his own sister, not worrying about her. Arson wondered inwardly if the young Marquis had always been this ambitious and greedy. He knew of his ambition, but hadn't expected it to reach this level of depravity. Arson remembered that Devin had fought alongside the current emperor during the coup, which had once made him think he was a decent person. But he now realized Lydia was right about at least one thing. If Devin knew Arson wanted that border territory, he wouldn't give it up easily. Devin wore a triumphant smile, while Arson thought that this man was ready to break his promises at any moment for his greed and wanted to bring Arson under his control at all costs. Arson decided to leave immediately to prepare for their departure. As he was leaving Devin asked for the departure date, and Arson coldly replied that they would leave in 2 days. Devin smiled sarcastically, pointing out it was better for Lydia to leave and not attend the state wedding to avoid seeing the mess. Arson bowed politely to Devin and left the room, then met Lydia outside. Lydia caught up to Arson and eagerly asked if he was leaving now. He affirmed. Lydia said goodbye to Arson, setting a time to meet in 2 days. Arson asked Lydia if she planned to stay in a place like this, gesturing toward the residence. Lydia wondered what he meant and replied naively that she needed to pack her things too. Arson explained to her that if it was just a few clothes, she could pack them now and leave with him immediately. Lydia approached him and whispered that she had one more important thing to do first. Lydia smiled happily, thinking she'd let Devin wait, and decided to leave quietly. But if he planned to play dirty, she would take more than just clothes. Lydia crept barefoot through the residence at night, remembering that her father was likely at the Lord's castle, but his treasures were still hidden here. Lydia muttered to herself excitedly that she was now going to raid her father's secret safe. Lydia remembered her father had personally taught her how to use the safe in an emergency, and began searching for the safe hidden under his name. But she was startled by something next to it on the floor. Lydia wondered in surprise if Devin had hidden something here. Her gaze fell on a coffin engraved with her father's name, Lydia Ivancheva, and she was horrified. Lydia screamed in her mind, wondering why there was a coffin when her father was still alive. Lydia realized Devin's madness. He had prepared a coffin while their father was still fighting his illness. Lydia thought of her father sadly, admitting that while he was a terrible husband, he was a good father. She recalled bits and pieces of her childhood with her father and Devin, and how her father had always supported them. Lydia remembered how her father had supported their reckless decisions, like her request to marry the third prince and his support for Devon's rebellion, realizing her father valued family above all else. Lydia overcame the shock of seeing the coffin and secretly challenged Devon in her heart. No matter what he did, this coffin would never be used. She began to search among the books lined up on the bookshelf, reaching behind the large tomes to find a carefully hidden small wooden box. She smiled and muttered to herself, finally found it. Lydia opened the box, her eyes sparkling at the sight of the numerous diamonds inside. Realizing this was what her father had told her about. Time took her back to a memory with her father after the rebellion succeeded and before she left the capital, when he told her about this safe, saying she could use its contents whenever she needed. Lydia felt a lump in her throat as she realized her father knew she was completely broke after selling all her assets to support Richard. She closed the box firmly, promising her father that she would make good use of this fortune this time. Holding a small needle, she renewed her vow to herself and her father, asking him to wait a little longer because she would definitely save him. In the imperial palace, Emperor Richard chided Arson for his decision to go to the countryside and not even attend his wedding, expressing his hurt. Arson coldly apologized. Richard asked him to confirm the rumors about taking Lydia with him, and Arson confirmed it, reasoning that it would be useful to build a temple on the border. Richard smiled, thinking that since Lydia had just become a priestess, nothing would happen in the short term. But he realized the priesthood could be renounced at any time, which meant if the two fell in love, Lydia could leave her position immediately. Richard warned Arson that he respected his intentions, but he had to be careful with Lydia. Arson misunderstood the warning as a physical threat and confidently asked if he thought he would lose in a fight against the young lady. Richard laughed, explaining that he didn't mean it that way, but that the woman was unstable and crazy, warning him not to get involved. Richard thought anxiously that the Ivancheva family already held immense power compared to him, the new emperor, and if they also gained Arson and the Black Wolf Knights, it would be a dangerous threat. Richard decided in his heart that he must prevent the union of Arson and Lydia at all costs. Arson interrupted him coolly, explaining that His Majesty had misunderstood, that there was nothing between him and Lady Lydia, and he had no intention of forming any relationship. Richard pressed him, asking if he truly had no feelings for her, so Arson swore on his sword that he did not. Richard relaxed, saying he thought so too, and rudely added that he had no reason to care about damaged goods. Hearing Richard use such an insulting term for his former fiancée, Arson's expression became extremely irritated, thinking how cruel he was when judging her. Richard changed the subject, talking about the remnants of the former emperor's forces and how Viscount Herban should not have been left alive. Arson left the palace, thinking of the young Marquis, Devon, and now the emperor, wondering in distress why everyone was so cruel to the young lady. 2 days later, Lydia walked out of the residence with a brilliant smile to greet Arson. Arson noticed her pale face and anxiously asked if she was ready to leave, as she didn't look well. She replied that she was fine, just a little tired. Arson stared sharply at Devon, who was sitting behind her, wondering if he had abused her again. At that moment, Lydia asked Devon for permission to leave. Devon stopped her with a cold smile, telling her to wait until she had signed the approval for Giselle's adoption. Lydia quickly signed it, wanting to get over with. Devon sarcastically commented on the carriage full of goods behind her, pointing out that he had told her to bring only a few clothes, but her luggage seemed excessive. When Lydia saw her bag fall and its contents spill out in front of everyone, her eyes widened in shock. She screamed Devon's name as he pulled her underwear from the bag, putting everyone in an awkward situation. Arson averted his gaze, trying to ignore the scene and avoid watching. Lydia berated Devon, asking what on earth he was doing, and told him that even a priestess needs to wear underwear, describing his actions as going too far. Devon looked at the bag suspiciously, as he had originally thought she might have hidden something valuable inside. But he found that she had indeed only brought clothes, just as she said. Lydia stood before him, filled with rage and embarrassment. Devon realized he had suspected her wrongly, so he coldly told her he had made a mistake and that she was now allowed to leave. Lydia glared at her brother angrily, then turned and told Arson to leave immediately. A silence then fell between them, and Arson noticed Lydia seemed extremely irritated after the humiliation. Arson broke the silence, pointing out that she had been holding the bag very carefully the whole way and suggested she put it aside to rest. Lydia flatly refused, clutching the bag tightly and telling him that her expensive underwear was inside. She smiled slyly and whispered to him that it wasn't just ordinary clothing, it was studded with diamonds. Lydia explained that she had anticipated a thorough luggage check, so she used the sewing skills she had learned and mastered in the labor camp in her past life. She had unstitched the lining of her underwear and cleverly embroidered the diamonds inside, so no one would think a fortune was hidden there. Arson asked her the price of the underwear. Lydia enthusiastically and spontaneously offered to let Arson see for himself, saying they were special designs. Arson blushed and shouted at her, denying he was a pervert and sternly demanding she stop making such lewd jokes and show the dignity befitting a priestess. Lydia complained out of boredom, describing him as extremely rigid. Lydia changed the subject, asking him how long he was going to keep calling her lady. Arson told her he called her priestess Lydia. She told him he could just call her Lydia, but he nervously insisted that the title priestess Lydia was sufficient. Lydia asked him how much longer it would take to reach the inn after leaving the capital. Arson told her they would arrive in the evening, and from there, they would break away from the group and sneak to the Eastern labor camp together. Arson sternly warned her that the journey would be extremely arduous and exhausting, as they needed to rescue the people and return before the main party reached its destination, and asked if she was really sure she wanted to go. Lydia smiled confidently and reassured him, saying she would be fine and not to worry. She told herself that the difficulty didn't matter. What was important was rescuing the people who had suffered with her in the labor camp in her past life. She remembered their faces and silently promised in her heart for them to wait a little longer because she was coming for them. The carriage set off through the green forest, carrying Lydia's immense hopes. After arriving at the inn, Arson and Lydia headed east with a few attendants, where Arson introduced her to the merchant Milan. Arson explained the plan. They would disguise themselves as members of the Milan merchant group to enter the Count's territory, where the labor camp was located. Lydia greeted Mr. Milan with a smile, and Arson introduced her to his aide, Cedric. Cedric bowed respectfully. Lydia's expression brightened upon seeing him, as she remembered him from her past life as an exceptionally kind person, and so she welcomed him warmly. Cedric expressed surprise that Lydia remembered his family name and joked that he, unlike her, didn't remember people only by their last names. Suddenly, Cedric called for his companion, Randall, which surprised Lydia, who immediately recognized the man. Cedric apologized to Lydia for Randall's behavior, explaining that this companion had a peculiar and complex personality from the start, to which Lydia responded with a tense yet polite laugh. Lydia maintained a smile on the surface, convincing herself that she had to endure it this time to avoid causing unnecessary trouble. But inwardly, she was seething with anger, feeling that this endurance, which she had thought would be a one-time thing, had become endless. Lydia recalled Randall's provocative behavior throughout the journey before arriving in the East. He would pick fights for no reason and cast sharp glances whenever she spoke with Sir Arson. Lydia trembled with anger, wondering why he had been so hostile towards her since their last meeting. Arson noticed Randall's scowling face and jokingly commented that he seemed to have a lot of complaints since yesterday. Randall coldly replied that if it weren't for that woman, he wouldn't have any complaints, which shocked Lydia and made her tremble with rage. Cedric clapped Randall on the back forcefully yet friendly, describing him as a brat and thanking him for his hard work, while Randall looked at him sharply and asked why he was hitting him. Cedric dragged Randall away, and Lydia watched them, perplexed. Arson asked her if something had happened between her and Randall to make him harbor such hatred for her, to which Lydia replied that he simply didn't like her. Lydia began to analyze their relationship, naively wondering if Randall was Arson's guardian or perhaps a romantic relationship connected them. Suddenly, Lydia's eyes widened in shock as if she had realized something dangerous, and she muttered to herself, "Wait, don't tell me it's..." She looked at Arson, thinking deep down that despite everything, he was truly handsome. She started connecting the dots, thinking how such a handsome man had not had a single female scandal until now. Lydia imagined that there must have been a large number of women in the capital trying to get close to him and make something happen. She concluded that Arson had probably been repelling the women who approached him in the same rude manner he was treating her now. Arson noticed her staring at him in thought and coldly interrupted her, saying he didn't know what she was thinking, but she'd better not, to which Lydia just huffed. Lydia imagined a romantic scene between the two men, but Arson clearly read her mind and roared at her, denying it flatly and frighteningly. Lydia felt doubtful, wondering why he would treat her in such a strange way if that wasn't the case. In the evening, at an inn near the Eastern labor camp, Cedric once again apologized for the discomfort Lydia felt due to Randall's rude behavior. Cedric asked her to understand the situation, as Randall had special circumstances, so Lydia curiously asked what kind of special circumstances would make him act so rudely. Cedric began to explain that most of the knights in their order came from mercenary or commoner backgrounds. He reminded her that they had earned their knighthoods for their service in the successful counter-coup. Cedric then revealed a shocking fact. Randall came from a slave background. He explained, although he received a knighthood, he has no family name. Lydia listened in surprise, wondering if the reason for his behavior was an inferiority complex stemming from feeling like he was a knight in name only. Cedric told her with a slightly reproachful smile that he didn't know if she remembered, but after the victory, when they were heading to the capital, he had suggested that Randall serve as her escort knight. Cedric, imitating Lydia's past tone, reminded her of her scathing reply at the time. How can a slave be a knight? The word struck Lydia like a bolt from the blue. Her face turned pale, and she whispered in shock, "Oh my God," realizing she was the reason for his hatred. Lydia fell into a spiral of painful memories, admitting to herself that in the past she had been a noble in a negative and detestable sense. As her own mocking voice echoed in her mind, asking how a slave could be a knight, she re-experienced the vanity that had consumed her, driven by the delusion that she would soon marry Richard and become royalty. Cold sweat dripped down her pale face as she heard herself ordering them to bring a real knight, not that slave. She realized, even if it was too late, how immense the grave offense she had committed against this man was. Lydia sat alone, painfully berating herself for having had the audacity to be annoyed by his cold treatment, completely forgetting that she was the one who had inflicted the initial harm and wound. In the silence of the dark room, she wondered sorrowfully if this was the real reason she had returned to the past, to give her a chance to live correctly and right those fatal mistakes. She tried to save face in front of Cedric, forcing a smile as she thanked him for telling her the truth, admitting that without him, she might have made an even bigger mistake, while Cedric chuckled and downplayed it. Although it was late, Lydia made up her mind to go and apologize immediately, determined not to delay any longer and to lift the heavy burden from her shoulders. She opened the door and was surprised to find Arson standing before her in full gear. He coolly initiated the conversation, telling her to get ready to leave. Lydia tried to take the opportunity to bring up Randall and apologize, but he cut her off firmly, pointing out that the clouds were covering the moon, making it the perfect time to infiltrate undercover. Lydia swallowed the words she wanted to say and nodded in agreement, realizing it was not the time for sentiments. The scene shifts to the Eastern labor camp, shrouded in exhaustion and despair, where a red-haired pregnant woman named Maria staggered among her colleagues from extreme fatigue. Maria incoherently whispered a prayer to the priestess, begging the goddess for a piece of bread, specifically one with a lot of sugar on it. Meanwhile, her companion, Nella, watched her with pity and offered her own share of bread. Maria refused, claiming she was fine, but Nella anxiously insisted, reminding her that she was pregnant and needed good nutrition. Maria tried to lighten the mood with a weak smile, claiming she was just joking and was going to sleep because she was tired. Maria lay down, her heart filled with sadness and regret, realizing her words about the bread were not just a joke. A sense of guilt washed over her as she thought about the baby in her womb not even getting a decent meal. As Maria was falling asleep, a voice whispering her name startled her awake, and she opened her eyes heavily and painfully. An enticing aroma wafted to Maria's nose, the smell of fresh bread, and she found a person in a white cloak standing before her, telling her to wake up. Maria, thinking it was Nella for a moment, rubbed her eyes in surprise and said her words about the bread were just a joke, only then noticing that the person before her was not her companion. Maria stared in surprise at the strange woman who had stealthily approached her in the dark, wondering about her identity. Lydia smiled and placed a finger on her lips, signaling for silence, then took out a sugar-coated bread and gestured for her to follow quietly. Maria stared at the bread in amazement, unable to believe her wish had to come true so quickly. In a trembling voice, Maria asked if the woman was a messenger from the goddess. Lydia denied it with a gentle smile, explaining that she was a priestess, not a messenger. Lydia explained to Maria that she had come to take her away because she had received great help from her in the past, even though Maria might not remember it. Maria quickly got up anxiously, wondering if the others could come along too. Lydia reassured her and pointed to a nearby spot. There, Byron and Nella appeared safely. Maria's eyes widened in surprise when she saw the man standing with them. Lydia told her that he was the person Byron and Nella had been desperately searching for. Arson looked at them grimly. After revealing his identity, he turned to Lydia, who told him she had brought Maria, so they had to leave quickly before being discovered. Lydia carefully observed the path and whispered to her companions that the guard were busy with their night patrol on the opposite side, meaning they wouldn't pass this way for a while, so she considered it a golden opportunity for them to move. Lydia confidently led them straight towards the forest, and everyone followed her very carefully through the trees. Suddenly, the silence of the night was pierced by a stern voice. "Who's there?" Arson, Lydia, and the others froze in place, their faces showing shock and panic. A man carrying a lantern appeared in the darkness, but Lydia recognized him immediately and exclaimed in surprise, "Grandpa Robert." Old Man Robert was surprised to see Lydia before him and asked in confusion if she knew him, while the group breathed a sigh of relief upon realizing he wasn't a guard. The girls calmed down and began to laugh and hug out of relief. Lydia chided Old Man Robert, asking why he was wandering around outside instead of sleeping, and told him he had scared them to death. Robert grumpily pointed at them and replied that they were the ones making noise first, so they had no right to be angry with him. Robert quickly grasped the situation and looked at them knowingly, saying they were trying to escape. Robert decided to stay out of it, turning his back to them and saying it had nothing to do with him, advising them not to get caught and to leave safely. Lydia watched the old man leave, and then Robert told them that he was an old man with not much time left, and that the young people had to leave to start a new life. Lydia, having made up her mind, called him Grandpa, but he ordered her not to dawdle and to run away at once. Robert stopped in surprise, while Lydia smiled and proposed that he come with them. Robert looked at her in shock, unable to believe what he was hearing. Arson quickly intervened, grabbing Lydia's arm and whispering his objection to her, saying this wasn't part of the agreed-upon plan. Lydia turned to Arson and explained to him that Grandpa Robert was a mining expert and that bringing him along would be very useful, reminding him that the border territory also had mines. Lydia turned back to Robert and told him seriously that this was their only chance to escape, pleading with him to come with them, while everyone else also welcomed him and urged him to hurry. Robert walked with them, carrying his lantern, thinking to himself that he was an old man with not much time left and worrying that he would become a burden if they abandoned him on the road. Nella interrupted him, giving him a piece of bread and assuring him that they would all go to the end together. Lydia noticed Arson was still angry about her actions and quickly ran off to escape his wrath. They eventually managed to escape the labor camp safely. The scene switches to daytime, as they are riding on horseback through a green forest. Lydia fidgeted and complained at her, but heard a little from riding for so long. Arson, looking ahead with a blank expression, told her not to make inappropriate remarks, as he had said before. So Lydia muttered back, asking what was wrong with her, but arguing that it was just a part of the body and adding that it wasn't like she asked him to apply. Ointment. Arson pulled on the horse's reins and sternly told her that if she did ask for that, he would make her get off the horse immediately, adding with regret that, unfortunately, he didn't want to share a horse with a pervert. Lydia puffed out her cheeks in annoyance, describing him as overly critical, and then pointed out a more important issue. The title lady he was using was wrong. Arson admitted that he didn't feel she was truly a priestess, so the title felt unnatural to say. Lydia laughed and told him he had a talent for fluent cursing, suggesting he just call her Lydia. Arson was surprised by her request and fell silent for a moment before blushing and faintly whispering her name as she wished, while Lydia watched him with a smile. Arson felt extremely embarrassed and tried to quickly change the subject, asking if the mine she had mentioned earlier was the silver mine in the border territory. Lydia laughed happily and answered him enthusiastically, confirming that it was. Arson was skeptical about the mine's viability, assuring Lydia that the late Marquis had abandoned its development due to a lack of profitability. Lydia then replied sharply, describing him as knowing nothing. She confidently explained to him that places with silver veins usually have magic stones buried nearby, which meant there was a high probability of a magic stone mine in the border territory. Arson curiously asked about the source of her accurate information, and she replied that it was something she had learned from Grandpa Robert in her previous life. Arson started to feel that she was speaking in that strange way again. He recalled the results of the background check on her, which had turned up nothing suspicious. Except for her time at the Marquis's house, she had lived her entire life in the capital and had no connection to Duke Byron's family. He logically concluded that she shouldn't know Byron or Nella either, and wondered in confusion if a lie could be so perfect and detailed. The reality was right in front of him, because just as she had said, there really was a labor camp in the eastern province, and the people he had been desperately searching for were indeed there. What surprised him even more was that when she saw the old man a short while ago, she had immediately called out his name as if she knew him. He stole a glance at her beside him, and a dangerous question began to form in his mind. Could she really have died and come back to life? Lydia excitedly interrupted his thoughts, making a condition that if there really was a magic stone mine, he had to give her a large share of the money, to which Arson briefly agreed. He seriously asked her what she planned to do with so much money. Lydia closed her eyes and dreamed aloud, saying that once her revenge was over, she would leave to live on a warm island in the south, citing her extreme hatred of winter. Arson pondered her words, admitting to himself that if she had really been in a forced labor camp, her hatred for winter was logical and completely reasonable. But he placed his hand on the saddle, thinking it was probably about more than just winter. In a calm and direct voice, he asked her if she actually hated the empire itself. Lydia let out a clear, loud laugh and admitted to him with a brilliant smile that this was also true. Arson gazed at her smiling face, and suddenly a strange thought flashed through his mind, making his heart race. He used the edge of his robe to hide a slight blush, and told her in a faint voice that the plan to go south seemed like a good idea. The group finally arrived at a roadside inn, where the hungry crowd was treated to a hot meal of bread and sausages. Nella collapsed in tears by the table, worrying everyone, but she assured them she was only crying because the reality of their survival was finally sinking in. Arson watched her with a warm gaze, while Nella expressed her gratitude that he was alive and asked if he was hurt anywhere. Arson replied that he should be asking her that question and apologized profusely for being late and for not knowing she was in such a place. Byron, with a weary smile, tried to calm him down, asking him not to apologize and confirming that he was just grateful they had come to rescue them. Lydia watched the reunion with emotion, but Nella suddenly asked in surprise about the identity of the priestess who had brought them out, realizing she had never seen her before. Arson noticed her surprise and explained to her and everyone else that she was a priestess, but not the usual kind, a description that surprised Lydia. Maria, who was eating ravenously, interrupted them, apologizing for the intrusion, but she raised the question that had been lingering in her mind. Since she had no connection to Duke Byron's family, why was she rescued too? Grandpa Robert agreed with her, expressing curiosity about the same thing, while Lydia smiled nervously. Lydia decided in her heart that there was no need for them to know she had suffered terribly and died alongside them in her past life. She wanted to keep those painful memories to herself. In a calm voice, Lydia told them that none of them would remember and that she couldn't reveal the details. Then she looked at them with a brilliant and sincere smile, telling them she owed them a great debt and asking them to simply see this as repayment for that debt. As an understanding silence spread, Lydia spoke to Grandpa Robert, saying she wanted to ask a favor of him. Grandpa Robert pointed to himself and asked seriously if she had a special request for him personally. Lydia continued speaking to Grandpa Robert, explaining that there was a mine at their destination and asking him to check if it was a magic stone mine, even adding excitedly that it would be even better if he could supervise the development. Grandpa Robert, shocked and dismayed, shouted that he thought she had helped him escape so he could rest, only for her to want him to work at another mine, which made everyone around the table burst into laughter at the irony of the situation. Afterward, the group's conversation and light-hearted fun continued in a harmonious and relieved atmosphere. As Lydia was talking excitedly and happily, she suddenly noticed someone leaving through the back door. Lydia decided to get up, saying she was going out for some fresh air, when in fact she was following the person who had left. Lydia looked around outside and confirmed that she had seen him leave. She wondered where he had gone. She called out for Sir Randall, and Randall suddenly appeared behind her, saying with bitter sarcasm that a lowly person like him was honored to be called Sir Randall. Randall nervously covered his ears and asked sharply what she wanted, wondering if she had come to slap him again or something. Lydia held up her hands to deny it at once, assuring him that was certainly not the case. She told him clearly and calmly that she had come to apologize, which left Randall in a state of shock and confusion. Lydia sincerely repeated her apology while he stood silently watching her. Lydia told him that she had heard from Sir Cedric that she had ignored him because of his status, and Randall asked if the commander had ordered her to apologize. Lydia smiled gently and denied it, explaining that although it was late, she realized she had hurt him, so she had come to apologize of her own accord. Lydia explained that she didn't intend to force him to forgive her, as she hadn't realized the gravity of her mistake until she heard the story from Sir Cedric. Randall asked in surprise why she was apologizing if she didn't expect forgiveness. Lydia smiled brightly and told him she just wanted to let him know that she would never make that mistake again. She added with half-joking seriousness that if she ever spewed such insane words again, he could hit her. Randall blushed shyly and confusedly, muttering and wondering how a knight could lay a hand on a lady. Lydia laughed cheerfully, reminding him that was true, but she was no longer a marquis's daughter and had become a priestess. Randall told her that hitting a priestess was also unacceptable. Lydia became flustered and told him that's not what she meant. So Randall reassured her that he understood what she meant. Randall calmed down and stammered that it hadn't been that painful at first, just an unpleasant feeling. Meanwhile, Arson had been observing the situation from behind a door, ready to intervene and stop them if a conflict broke out, but he was surprised by the calm atmosphere. Arson watched the strange scene before him, which looked like a new beginning, while thinking that if she were like her old self, she would have slapped Randall's face instead of apologizing to him. Arson reflected on the series of strange events that had occurred since he got involved with this woman. Arson remembered how she knew his true identity and had told him the location of the nanny and teacher he had been searching for his whole life, realizing she had changed so much, as if she were a completely different person who had died and come back to life. Deep down, Arson decided to admit the truth, now convinced that for whatever reason, this person was no longer the arrogant and domineering Lydia Ivancheva of the past. An image of Lydia appeared in his imagination, smiling sincerely and holding out her hand to invite him this way. Arson watched in surprise as Lydia pulled his hand towards her. Arson suddenly woke up from his sleep with a racing heart, looking around in confusion. He muttered to himself about the nature of the strange dream as he wiped the sweat from his forehead. Byron greeted him in a gentle voice, surprised that he was up so early. So Arson asked Byron why he didn't sleep a little longer. Nella said the situation felt like a beautiful dream that chased away sleep, and Byron agreed, explaining that he was up early because they would be leaving soon. Arson stared at them stiffly, hiding the storm of emotions inside him, admitting to himself that it did indeed seem like an unbelievable dream, because these people he thought he would never see again in his life were now standing safely before him, exchanging smiles as if nothing had happened. He realized an undeniable fact. If Lydia hadn't told him their location, it would have taken much longer to find them, or perhaps he would never have seen them again in his life, and he clenched his fists tightly. Struck by this thought, Arson suddenly realized, wondering if he had even thanked her yet for what she had done. As Lydia yawned drowsily, she started the conversation with a good morning, wondering if it was dawn. Lydia rubbed her eyes sleepily like a child, which surprised Arson, and he looked at her in amazement. He noticed the blush on her cheeks and her soft features, thinking that the more he looked at her, the more she resembled a cute little rabbit. Lydia noticed him staring and asked in surprise why he was looking at her like that, anxiously touching her face in case there was something on it. Arson became flustered and turned his face away, scolding himself for his strange thoughts and stammering that it was nothing. He gathered his courage, stood seriously before her, and told her he just wanted to say thank you. Lydia was taken aback by his sudden thanks, her eyes widening in surprise. Arson continued with sincerity and gratitude, explaining that thanks to her, he had found his teacher and nanny, and he expressed his deep gratitude to her again. Lydia blushed and smiled in confusion, trying to downplay it. She stammered that it was for her own benefit as well, but Arson held his ground, saying that gratitude was gratitude and it had to be expressed. Lydia Lydia felt extremely awkward in this atmosphere of serious gratitude, so she suddenly shouted at him that it was too early to be thanking her, reminding him that they hadn't fully escaped until they left the East. Arson quietly agreed with her, noting that she was absolutely right. Lydia became excited and demanded that he hurry up and leave immediately. But Arson looked at her with a meaningful gaze and pointed at her clothes. With a sly smile, Arson asked if she intended to leave in those pajamas. Lydia realized the situation and shrieked in embarrassment, then ran off to change, scolding him that he didn't need to know where she was going. As she left, she placed a hand on her burning face, thinking in shock that teasing people wasn't Arson's usual character. The scene shifts to the forest, where the carriages are preparing to depart, just as they had when they came in. They decided to escape the Count's territory disguised as employees of the Milan Merchant Guild, while the people rescued from the labor camp would hide in the wagons as cargo to avoid inspection. The passengers inside the wagon felt cold and nervous, cautiously exchanging whispers. Outside, Lydia, on horseback, approached the wagon driven by the merchant Milan and asked him to confirm the plan. She stressed that they had to bribe the soldiers at the checkpoint to ensure a smooth passage. Milan agreed with her, confirming it was the right way to get through quickly. Lydia took 2 gold coins from her pocket and handed them to him, asking if he could use this. He looked at her in surprise, as he had already prepared something, but he understood her intention and accepted the offer. Lydia smiled and thanked Milan, but behind that sentence lay a cunning plan, as the gold buttons she had produced were not just an ordinary bribe, but buttons torn from her brother Devon's jacket, clearly engraved with the crest of the Marquis of Ansel. Family. Lydia realized that once this button was passed to the soldiers as a bribe, it would begin to circulate within the Count's territory, and what truly intrigued her was the Count's reaction upon discovering this fact. She turned her head, thinking that Emperor Richard had no idea an illegal labor camp existed here. She wondered in confusion, if Richard wasn't the culprit, how had she ended up being dragged away and imprisoned in that hell in her past life? Could it be that Devon had orchestrated this dirty trick to get rid of her? Lydia realized the button might not reach the Count, or that there might be no reaction at all, but she decided not to give up. She gripped the horse's reins forcefully and firmly, convincing herself that she would eventually uncover the whole truth. At the Marquis's residence, Devon furiously slammed his fist on the table, shattering the things on it and cursing that bastard. After the news of Lydia becoming a priestess spread throughout the capital, he stood before his desk, blinded by rage, cursing the situation before him. He wearily wiped his face, realizing the source of the rumor was the imperial palace itself. Sure enough, the emperor had spread the news himself. The emperor's goal was to ensure she would not get involved with arson under any circumstances. But he now realized he was in a predicament, as this was not a groundless rumor he could publicly deny, and he had no intention of defying the emperor's decision for now. Devon called for the butler, who immediately appeared at the door. He sternly ordered the butler to send a message to Empress Giselle, asking her to visit the Marquis as soon as possible, deciding he could not sit idly by while things spun out of control. Later, Giselle sat with Devon, and Giselle softly advised him not to worry too much about the rumor. Devon explained that this rumor could hinder and restrict Lydia, which was why he was concerned. But Giselle replied that even if the two did fall in love, as long as Lydia renounced her status as a priestess, there was no doctrinal issue that could prevent their marriage. Giselle abruptly changed the subject, asking if her brother had not yet considered marriage. Devon found her sudden question strange. Giselle gave a brilliant smile, hiding a cunningness behind it, reminding him that she was now also a member of the Ivancheva family, that she was worried about the family line ending, and then maliciously asked if the reason was that he could not forget his first love. Devon laughed sarcastically, noting that she had initially tried to flatter him, but was now suddenly meddling in his private affairs. He told her that she wanted more than just his family name. Giselle smiled, and said it seemed he had already uncovered and seen through her heart. Devon decided to be frank with her, telling her with a cunning smile that he would honestly answer her hidden motive, admitting that his first love was just an excuse and he simply did not want to marry. Then he directly asked her what she wanted. Giselle played her trump card, asking if he would agree to adopt her second child if he remained unmarried. Devon showed great interest and surprise at the proposal. Devon contemplated her clever plan, explaining that if the family adopted a prince, Richard could not easily abandon or marginalize the Ivancheva family. Devon considered the offer, admitting it was a very tempting proposal, and promised her he would think about it seriously. The scene returns to Lydia and her party, who had quickly left the eastern region and joined the Order of Knights, heading to the Marquise. Lydia got off the carriage, sighing in extreme exhaustion and complaining about the fatigue, saying she could finally relax a little. Her foot suddenly tripped, and she lost her balance, letting out a cry of alarm. Before Lydia could fall to the ground, a strong hand caught her, and she found that the person who saved her was Randall. She stammered her thanks to him. Randall silently lowered his head, then quickly turned and left without a word. Lydia breathed a sigh of relief, realizing she had unknowingly let her guard down. Watching Randall walk away with visible tension, Lydia thought to herself that if he hadn't caught her, she would have been seriously injured. Meanwhile, Arson watched all of this from a distance, thinking with regret that perhaps he should have had her ride in the carriage from the start. He clenched his fists, admitting to himself that if it were up to him, he would have preferred to be the one who caught and saved her. He was suddenly startled and tried to banish these thoughts, asking himself in surprise what on earth he was thinking. He saw Lydia holding the small of her back and wondered if her back hurt, also recalling that she had complained about her but hurting last time. Suddenly, a heavy hand landed on his shoulder, and Cedric appeared, saying with feigned understanding that he understood the young master was at a vigorous age, but he shouldn't be doing that. Arson looked at him, uncomprehending, so Cedric explained with a mischievous grin that he meant staring at a woman's butt. Arson stiffly denied it, explaining that Lydia was a priestess first and not just a woman. Cedric laughed and corrected him, saying that in that case, he shouldn't be staring at a priestess's butt, while Arson muttered in annoyance that he wasn't looking. Cedric waved and left, joking that lying was also wrong and that he would pray to the goddess tonight to ask for forgiveness for the master's sins committed today, leaving Arson feeling wrong. Lydia suddenly appeared and called out to him, and Arson, startled, nervously asked what she wanted. Lydia smiled and asked for permission, saying she wanted to visit the nearby plains before entering the Marquise territory. Arson found her request strange, but did not object and asked for the reason. Lydia revealed a confident smile. She excitedly told him that she had said before she would cure her father's illness, and the cure was there. Lydia explained that the disease her father suffered from was called white ghost sickness, named so because seeing hallucinations of white ghosts was one of its common symptoms. She added that, for a long time, it was considered incurable, but in her previous life, during her time in the labor camp, a cure was discovered. She revealed the shocking truth. The disease stemmed from drug addiction, as the herb used as medicinal smoke throughout the country was the very cause, and once the toxins accumulated in the body were eliminated, recovery was swift. Lydia picked a yellow flower, explaining that the antidote was in the root of this yellow mountain dandelion. After a tea was prepared from the root, Arson watched as the golden liquid was poured into a cup. Inside the Marquise residence, Arson and Lydia sat by the sick Marquise bedside, and Arson asked her doubtfully if the disease could really be cured with such a tea. Lydia looked at him confidently and said that if he didn't believe it, he should just wait and see. Lydia carefully fed the tea to her father, sadly recalling how in her past life she had been locked in the labor camp and couldn't even attend her father's funeral. She swore she would not let him pass away in vain this time. 10 days later, the Marquis slowly opened his eyes, with Devon and Lydia standing by his side in anticipation. His gaze met Lydia's, and he whispered her name in a weak voice, her eyes filling with tears of emotion. Lydia rushed to him, hugged him tightly, and cried out for her father. The Marquis smiled and held her affectionately, teasing her by asking if she had missed her father that much. He gently stroked her hair, lovingly wondering why a grown girl was crying so sorrowfully. Lydia, sobbing uncontrollably, shed hot tears before her newly awakened father, calling out his name and Richard's name, stammering to stir his emotions. She told him in a broken voice that Richard had called off their engagement and announced he was marrying Giselle instead of her. Lydia upped the drama, claiming that Richard not only did that but also gloated, hoping she would suffocate from a broken heart. She dropped the biggest bombshell in front of her stunned father, revealing that Richard had been cheating on her with Giselle throughout their entire engagement, and that her cousin was already pregnant with his child. The Marquis flew into a rage, unable to believe Richard would dare treat his daughter this way, especially after the Marquis had risked his family's future to support his rebellion. He described Richard as a shameless bastard and sternly asked what role his son, Devon, had played in this farce, and what he had done to protect his sister. Lydia continued to skillfully play the victim, telling her father that Devon had coldly accepted the cancellation of the engagement without any resistance. She added, to the Marquis's utter shock, that Devon had registered Giselle as the family's adopted daughter and had threatened to lock Lydia in the residence if she did not agree. The Marquis immediately summoned the butler and gravely asked him if Devon had sent any messengers to inform him of these developments. The butler awkwardly confirmed that the young master had not sent a single person back since heading to the capital. The Marquis felt betrayed and bitter, thinking that while he was ill, only his daughter had cared for him while his son and heir had ignored him. The Marquis furiously ordered Devon to be brought to him at once, but Lydia stopped him, saying she had something else to tell him. Lydia claimed she had wanted to hide it out of pity, but told him there was something even more shocking. She revealed the cruel truth. Devon, believing he would not survive, had already prepared a coffin for his death. The Marquis stared ahead with a stunned and broken expression, unable to comprehend that his own son had been waiting for him to die. Suddenly, the Marquis clutched his head and fell backward, screaming from a spike in his blood pressure as the butler and Lydia rushed to him. The Marquis regained consciousness, clutching his head in pain, and decided he must immediately send someone to the capital to verify this information in person. He thanked Lydia for telling him the truth. The Marquis sternly ordered the butler to ensure that news of his recovery would not reach the capital under any circumstances, and the servant immediately complied. Lydia thought cleverly, realizing her father was a man obsessed with bloodline purity, which was why he had always been lenient with his heir, Devon. Lydia realized things were different now. Her father would be unable to ignore the betrayal of a son who wished him dead and had prepared his coffin. Lydia smiled confidently, realizing the relationship between Devon and her father was bound to collapse, and this was the true beginning of her revenge. The scene shifts to the Lord's castle in the Yebben border region, where the days seemed peaceful and serene, as if the previous hardships had been nothing but a lie. Lydia and her friend Maria were happily strolling through the market when they ran into Cedric, who asked about their destination. Lydia smiled and replied that they were out to buy some baby supplies, considering the lack of good shops in the countryside. Cedric commented with a calm smile that the two girls had become close so quickly. Maria excitedly announced that they had decided to form a special group, so Cedric curiously asked what type of group it was, saying he would like to join if it was interesting. The two girls proudly announced that the group was exclusively for women who were unlucky with men, and confirmed it with a thumbs up, revealing that Maria had already heard all about Lydia's canceled engagement. Lydia explained that anyone could join, but there was one condition: to swear off dating ever again. Arson watched Lydia with a scrutinizing and doubtful gaze, wondering if she really intended to never see any man again. Arson continued to mutter to himself, with a sarcastic suggestion in his tone that perhaps she should improve her ability to judge and choose men. Lydia was surprised by his gaze, then suddenly approached Arson, confusing him, and asked if he had something more to say. Arson quietly told Lydia that the men the Marquis had sent to the capital had returned. Lydia was surprised, exclaiming that this was no small matter. Arson recalled what had happened earlier, that the Marquis was already out of bed and walking around the residence, which had given him a positive shock. Lydia admitted she had only heard about the medicine's effects, but had never expected it to work so spectacularly. She asked for Arson's opinion on the matter, so he asked her in return what she meant by her words. She seriously asked Arson if he now believed what she had told him before more. Arson confessed frankly that if he hadn't believed her words from the beginning, he wouldn't have let her live this long. Lydia froze for a moment, realizing he hadn't fully believed her at first. Lydia smiled brightly, thanking Arson from the bottom of her heart. She told him gratefully that without him, she would have starved to death at the Marquis's residence, and thanks to him, things were proceeding as planned. Meanwhile, the Marquis was seething with rage as he read the report, screaming that Devon had not only made a coffin, but had also hired an engraver for a tombstone, and ordered his men to depart immediately. To cancel the adoption, the Marquis loudly condemned his son for daring to speak of adoption without the family head's permission. Just then, Lydia peeked her head through the door and called out to her father. The Marquis turned to her, heartbroken, and told her that every word she had said was true, describing Devon and Giselle as ungrateful beasts. The Marquis directed his fury particularly at Giselle, recalling how he had taken her in when she was an orphan, how she was supposed to be just a maid, but he had raised her as a noble, only for her to stab him in the back in the end. The head butler confirmed his words, and he continued sorrowfully that not only did she not look for a cure for him, but she seduced the young master and dared to covet the position of an adopted daughter. Lydia thought nervously that canceling the adoption was a given, but it would be troublesome if all the anger was focused solely on Giselle. Lydia decided to subtly redirect the anger, pretending to be naive as she asked her father if he really believed Giselle could have decided all this on her own, implying that Richard's influence must have been involved in the adoption matter as well. The Marquis realized this and furiously declared that he could not sit idly by and must head to the capital immediately. Lydia feigned concern, warning that it might harm his health again. The Marquis affectionately patted her head and said that after she had treated him like this, he had no health problems. He reassured her that her father would go and take care of everything and told her to rest and see him later. Lydia politely declined, smiling as she told him she wanted to go to the border, lying that since she had become a priestess, she wanted to do her best there. The Marquis was deeply moved by her words, his eyes welling up with tears. The Marquis praised his daughter, saying she was truly remarkable, and compared her to the mischievous Devon, saying he should have learned from his pure-hearted sister, while affectionately poking her forehead with his finger. Lydia laughed nervously, feeling a pang of guilt for deceiving her father. Lydia left the room, thinking with relief that things were going exactly as she wished. Lydia realized that once her father reached the capital, he would cancel Giselle's adoption, and even if she and Devon agreed, the matter would be over as long as the family had refused, and she anticipated the Emperor would try to persuade him. Lydia smiled confidently, assuring herself that the Emperor's attempt would be futile. She recalled that her father had believed his daughter of direct lineage would become the Empress, which was why he had supported Richard. She remembered how Richard had disregarded that implicit agreement by having an affair with Giselle. Lydia was certain that the betrayal and humiliation her father felt would be so immense that neither the Emperor's persuasion nor his threats would work on him anymore. Lydia asserted to Arson with full confidence that to her father, who had just ascended the throne, Richard was just a novice emperor, and no matter what he tried, her father would handle it on his own. Arson noticed her mood had improved, thinking to himself that her complexion looked much better than it did in the capital. Arson suddenly stopped and asked her doubtfully if she also intended to return to the capital. Lydia was surprised by his question and looked at him in astonishment. Arson suggested she stay at the Marquis's residence instead of leaving. Lydia blinked in confusion, trying to understand the implication in his words. Lydia approached him seriously, wondering if he was worried she would reveal his secret. Lydia understood his meaning, concluding that he wanted her to stay within his sight to monitor her, worried she would leak his secret, but he quickly denied it. She to him explained that she didn't mean that, but rather that she wouldn't follow him to the border, but at the same time, she wouldn't stay at the Marquis's residence either. Lydia assured him she would not go to the Eads family residence and would not be a bother to him if she accompanied him. So Arson sarcastically asked her where she would stay at the border if not at the residence. She excitedly told him that Sir Cedric had told her there was a temple there, and a priestess should naturally stay in a temple. Arson looked at her in despair, explaining that there was indeed a temple, but the problem was that it was a ruined building that hadn't been used in 50 years. Lydia paid no mind to his warning, optimistically asking if the basic structure of the building was still intact, confirming her decision to repair and use it with Priest Byron. Arson helplessly placed a hand on his forehead and decided to stop arguing, while Lydia reassured him that she wouldn't cause any trouble anyway and that he should just wait and see. Arson thought worriedly that she had yet to realize how cold and dangerous the border region was. The next day, the Marquis immediately set off for the capital, and since there was nothing left to do at the Lord's castle, Arson, Lydia, and their party also decided to depart for the border. Arson ordered his men to load the supplies provided by the Marquis onto the carriages. He turned to Lydia and seriously asked her to ride in a carriage this time, reasoning that the road to the border was fraught with danger. Lydia found it strange that he described the road as so dangerous, but she agreed to his request. Lydia sat in the carriage pondering his words, noting that despite his warning, nothing major had happened so far, even if the road was a bit bumpy. She remembered that monsters lived at the border, but convinced herself his words were just a precautionary warning and nothing more. The narration explains that the three villages on the edge of the Ivancheva Marquise were collectively known as the arid border region, where nights were long and monsters appeared frequently. Since ancient times, the Edis family, vassals to the Ivancheva Marquise, had been responsible for guarding this border in exchange for exemption from taxes and conscription. Lydia now understood the real reason why Arson guarded the border. She chuckled softly to herself, naively telling herself they hadn't reached the border yet, and ruling out the idea of monsters appearing on the main road. Suddenly, something huge slammed into the carriage with tremendous force, instantly breaking its balance. The soldiers shouted that there was a monster as a giant, multi-legged monster appeared and attacked the convoy, while Arson gave the order for everyone to attack. Lydia screamed in terror, unable to believe that the possibility she had just ruled out had happened so quickly. Inside the tilted carriage, Lydia tried to wake Neela, who had fainted from shock. While protecting Neela, she heard the screams of the soldiers outside as they tried to lure the monster away. Maria called out in a panicked voice to Priestess Lydia and Neela, telling them to hurry this way to survive the attack. At that critical moment, Lydia rushed to protect Maria, holding her tightly amidst the extreme chaos. Lydia froze on the spot, her legs unable to move from extreme fear, as the monster opened its terrifying maw, ready to pounce on them. Lydia shut her eyes tightly, resigning herself to the idea that her end had come, thinking she would die in this desolate place. Suddenly, a sharp sound cut through the air, and a gleaming sword split the monster's body at the last second. Arson emerged from behind the dust, his face and body covered in blood, and eagerly and anxiously asked if Lydia was all right. Lydia looked at him, her eyes filled with tears of shock and relief, and whispered his name in a trembling voice. Arson calmly and confidently asked them to step aside a little while he quickly took care of the matter. As he stood firmly with his sword in hand, Lydia watched, his broad back as he walked toward the monster, admitting to herself that she knew he held the title of the Empire's strongest swordsman, but seeing it with her own eyes was something else entirely. Seeing his overwhelming power, she now clearly realized why Devon and Emperor Richard were so desperate and tried so hard to keep Arson by their side. The battle was over, and everyone rushed to check on each other. Maria was horrified to see bloodstains on Lydia's clothes. Lydia chuckled softly and reassured her, explaining that the blood wasn't hers but monster blood that had splattered on her during the fight. Maria sighed in relief, saying it was good she wasn't hurt, but the remaining bloodstains were a problem in themselves, and she urged her to go wash up and change her clothes quickly. Lydia agreed. An hour later, Lydia felt refreshed after taking a bath and changing into clean clothes. She was chatting with Maria while holding her dirty clothes, relieved that there was a stream nearby, and suggested washing the blood-soaked clothes as well. Suddenly, the two girls stopped in their tracks, stunned by the scene before them. The scene that made them stop was the sight of the knights, including Arson, bathing in the river, their upper bodies bare, revealing their well-built figures. Maria told the knights they were going to do laundry in that spot and to feel free to continue bathing. One of the knights spontaneously shouted enthusiastically for them to go right ahead. Lydia tried to quiet her and pull her away, telling her to do the laundry later. Maria argued with her friend Lydia, justifying her desire to stay by saying they weren't completely naked and boldly adding that their bodies were amazing and fun to look at. Lydia scolded her and covered her eyes, saying it was improper to stare like that. But Lydia's gaze suddenly fell on Arson as he was slicking his wet hair back, and she was struck once again by how stunning he looked. Lydia covered Maria's mouth to quiet her, muttering to herself in surprise that she had thought Sir Arson had a slender build, but now, staring at his firm muscles and sculpted waist, she saw he had an amazing and unexpected physique under his clothes. Maria noticed Lydia's gaze, smiled slyly, and whispered to her that she also thought they looked great, which made Lydia suddenly shriek and try to collect her thoughts. Lydia tried to salvage her dignity, demanding that Maria stop making jokes unsuitable for a priestess. But Maria quickly came back to defend her position, saying that even the goddess would allow just looking, especially since the scene was right in front of them, and they hadn't sought it out on purpose. Lydia asked if that was true, and Maria affirmed it. Lydia asked for her opinion on which of the knights had the best body. The two girls thought they were speaking too quietly for anyone to hear, but in reality, all the knights, led by Arson, were listening with intense concentration to every word, filled with curiosity and masculine vanity, wanting to know who the lady would choose as the owner of the best physique. The knights exchanged eager glances, whispering to each other that an opportunity like this couldn't be missed, and so one of them approached Priestess Lydia with a confident smile. The knights began to proudly display their muscles in the sunlight, with one asking the priestess to take a closer look at their magnificent muscles while striking poses that highlighted their physical prowess. Arson watched this scene coldly from a distance with an annoyed expression, thinking that everyone was focused on such worthless trifles. Lydia cupped her chin in thought, stating that the choice was very difficult, while the knights waited for her verdict in suspense and hope. After a moment's hesitation, Lydia announced her honest opinion, saying that in her view, Sir Cedric had the best body, which stunned everyone. Maria enthusiastically agreed, confirming she also chose Sir Cedric, and so the two ladies were in agreement on the same night. The news hit the rest of the knights like a thunderbolt, their expressions frozen in shock, while Cedric became the unexpected winner amidst his comrades' disappointment. Cedric, basking in his victory and immense happiness, shouted and pumped his fists in the air, celebrating his win of the best body title. The losing knights whispered jealously that Cedric was about to die of happiness, and tried to justify their loss by saying the girls couldn't see clearly from that distance. One knight tried to save face in front of the soldiers, claiming with feigned seriousness that practical combat muscles were what mattered most, and that the two ladies had no idea what they were looking at, while Cedric taunted them, laughing and telling them to admit they were jealous. Arson stood alone, pondering with a strange sense of seriousness whether girls really liked that huge, bulky muscle type. Arson looked doubtfully at his own hands and body, wondering if huge masses of muscle were to Lydia's taste, but decisively denied it in his mind. Suddenly, remembered Lydia's prolonged gaze on him earlier, and asked himself in confusion why she would stare at his body like that if she preferred the bulky type. He had automatically assumed, based on those gazes, that she would choose him. Arson, toweling his hair and lost in analysis, recalled that the Emperor wasn't that muscular either, and wondered if personal taste and love were two different things. He concluded, very seriously, that for her to go against her preferred body type for him must be true love. Suddenly, he stopped toweling his hair, startled by his own thoughts, and asked himself in surprise why he was even concerned with such a trivial matter in the first place. Arson decided to ignore the matter, deeming it unimportant, but Sir Cedric interrupted him, happily waving his arms and calling out to him as commander. Cedric boasted about his physique in front of Arson, proudly pointing out that his body had been approved by the two ladies, and asked if he didn't look cool too. Arson turned his face away, trying to act indifferent, but in reality, he was intensely irritated and distressed by the whole situation. Unable to suppress his inner annoyance, Arson answered curtly, "Not at all." Cedric looked at him, surprised and nervous, and tried to quickly salvage the situation, claiming he was just joking and that there was no need for him to be so tense. Arson walked away, wiping his face with his hand and cursing the current situation, wondering why his behavior became so strange whenever Lydia was involved. The scene changes to the campsite, where Arson enters the tent of his wet nurse, Neela, and kindly asks how she is doing. Neela smiled gently, assuring him that she was only slightly startled and not seriously injured, and apologized for delaying their journey because of her. Arson sat beside her and told her there was no need to apologize, as they had to repair the overturned carriage anyway and had decided to camp here for the day. Neela sighed and hesitantly asked him about Lady Lydia, explaining that because Lydia had shielded her with her body at the time, she couldn't see clearly, but she knew she had seen the monster die right in front of her, and that Lydia must have been terrified. A look of clear concern appeared on Arson's face. Neela gratefully recalled the difficult moments, telling him that even in such a terrifying situation, Lydia had not hesitated to shield her with her entire body. Arson sat quietly, his heart filled with an overwhelming and sincere gratitude for the girl. A calm and warm smile appeared on his face as he muttered to himself, affirming her courage and sacrifice. An image of Lydia, smiling, surfaced in Arson's mind, and he thought that she had always given him nothing but reasons to be grateful. As his wet nurse Neela bid him farewell, she entrusted the young lady to him, asking him to take good care of her, to which Arson briefly agreed. Arson walked towards the tent, determined to seize this opportunity to persuade Lydia to give up the idea of living in the dilapidated temple and move into the mansion. He told himself that she must now be aware of the danger of monsters, and if he explained the details of the border monsters to her, she wouldn't stubbornly insist on living alone. He was mentally comparing the safe mansion with the abandoned temple when his thoughts were interrupted by the sight of his aide, Cedric, and Lydia standing in front of the tent. Lydia was shocked and confused by what Cedric had just said. Cedric told her that he had suggested it would be best for her to share a tent with Commander Arson, and Lydia loudly demanded to know why, right to his face. Cedric explained to her that the carriage was being repaired and it was too dangerous to sleep in the open, and since she couldn't share a tent with the male knights, staying by the commander's side was the safest option. Lydia acknowledged the logic, but was still hesitant. Cedric tried to persuade her, pointing out that it might seem strange to others for an unmarried man and woman to share a tent, and slyly asked if she was worried the commander might do something inappropriate to her. Lydia immediately denied it with a smile, affirming that from her observations, Sir Arson was a very conservative person, and that he wouldn't do anything improper. Cedric was laughing and about to tell her that their commander wasn't conservative, but simply had no idea how to deal with women, when Arson appeared behind him. Arson glared sternly at Cedric, scolding him for talking too much, which scared Cedric out of his wits. Lydia turned to Arson and asked him, innocently and boldly, if it was true that he didn't know how to get along with women. Arson silently squeezed Cedric's shoulder hard and denied it with extreme stiffness. Lydia hummed suspiciously, while Arson broke out in a cold sweat, thinking that not knowing how to get along referred to those who didn't know how to handle women, whereas he deliberately chose not to date, so his situation was different. Lydia smiled slyly and asked him in a teasing tone if that was the case, and Arson realized she didn't believe him. Lydia tried to salvage the situation, exaggeratingly acting as if she completely believed him. She added that it was amusing, and hearing it made her no longer hesitate to share a tent with him, reiterating that she trusted him but found it amusing. Arson realized she didn't believe him at all. Once inside the tent, he seriously told her to sleep on the inner bunk while he would sleep on the outer side. Lydia praised his character, saying that for someone who didn't know women, his manners were excellent. So he irritably reminded her that she had just said she believed him, to which she simply replied with an ah. Lydia was curious to know why, despite his popularity, he deliberately chose not to date, asking if it was because of some secret. Arson was silent for a moment, admitting to himself that she wasn't wrong, because if he had a lover, he might unintentionally reveal his secret. He thought painfully of the crimes he had committed to bear this heavy secret, concluding that in his current situation, increasing the number of people who knew was a luxury he could not afford. Lydia rolled around on the bed out of boredom, and Arson told her she seemed very interested in his love life. So Lydia told him that at his age, he should be married, and since he wasn't engaged, she was just curious. Arson turned the tables on her, reminding her that the young Marquis, Devon, wasn't married either, and she should be worrying about him instead. Lydia fell silent nervously, then suddenly told him slyly that Devon also had a secret. Arson curiously asked what the secret was, so she asked if he was curious. She told him to come closer, and when he leaned toward her, she whispered in his ear that the secret was a secret. Lydia laughed happily at her own prank, while Arson sighed, saying she really enjoyed teasing him. Lydia playfully winked at him, promising to tell him the truth this time. Lydia revealed the secret in a faint voice, explaining that Devon didn't want to get married not because he didn't want to, but because he actually couldn't. She recalled her mother's words on her deathbed, where her mother had advised that she would one day grow up, get married, and have children. She remembered her mother sternly instructing her that she must have at least 2 sons and give one of them to her brother for adoption. Returning to the present, Lydia dropped a bombshell in front of Arson, whispering that Devon was a eunuch. Arson was utterly shocked, his eyes bulging with impact and confusion as he stammered, asking what she had just said. Lydia smiled sarcastically and clearly repeated her words, confirming that her brother's body was incapable of performing a man's function. Lydia explained that her mother was frail and doted on Devon, as he was her only son, worrying about him until her last day. She added that her mother had asked her to have 2 sons to provide an heir for her infertile brother, and they had agreed to keep it a secret between them. Lydia admitted to herself that in her past life, she had faithfully kept this secret out of love for her mother, but now she had no intention of doing so. She told Arson that the cause traced back to a medicine he had taken incorrectly as a child. Arson pondered with his chin in his hand, thinking it was an exaggeration to call this a dangerous secret, as it was easy for nobles to adopt heirs, so it wasn't a fatal flaw. Lydia clarified that others might see it that way, but her father strongly insisted that the family bloodline must be continued by his direct descendants and would accept nothing less. Arson questioned the logic of the plan, pointing out that the Marquis would not easily give up his only son, meaning the adoption plan could conflict with the father's wishes if he was unaware. Lydia praised his sharp observation with a sly smile, telling him there was a way around that obstacle. She winked at him playfully, declaring that even if he asked, she wouldn't tell him the real secret, because that was a genuine secret. She thought to herself that if he knew the secret, he might bypass her and make a deal directly with Devon, and although she trusted him, she preferred to reduce variables to ensure her plan's success. Arson coolly adjusted his tie and announced that he wasn't particularly curious to know more. Arson changed the subject, asking her seriously if she really intended to live in the abandoned temple. He explained the dangers of the border situation, pointing out that monsters frequently attacked villages and that many were far more ferocious and larger than the one she had seen today. He added that ordinary people would be frozen with fear when facing a monster, so Lydia anxiously asked how often these monsters appeared. Arson assured her that disturbances caused by monsters occurred at least once a month, which plunged Lydia into deep anxiety and thought. Arson thought she had realized the danger and would agree to go to the Eads mansion, but she made a strange decision, saying, "I must learn swordsmanship." Arson looked at her, surprised and shocked, rendered speechless by this sudden decision. Lydia firmly repeated her decision, saying she would learn to use a sword, reasoning that after hearing about the dangers, she realized she needed at least one means of protecting herself. She gave a thumbs up with a confident smile, reminding him of what she had said before, that she would never become a burden to him, while Arson stood there silently, unable to answer. Arson ran his hand through his hair, tired and frustrated, admitting to himself that persuading her was not easy at all. He decided to end the discussion for the night and ordered her to sleep, as they had to leave early the next morning, to which Lydia complained in surprise that who could sleep so early. Despite her complaints, Lydia fell into a deep and comfortable sleep as soon as she lay down, while Arson stood by the bed, unable to sleep because of her presence. Arson sat guarding her with his sword in hand, looking at her with pity, thinking she must be exhausted. Arson recalled Lydia's recent experiences, from taking poison to commit suicide, climbing a wall to escape the Marquis' mansion, to infiltrating the labor camp, and facing the monster attack today, so he decided to watch over her all night. In the dead of night, the tent was silent. Arson was cleaning his sword when suddenly, a suppressed groan reached his ears. He turned to the bed and saw Lydia tossing and turning, clearly restless, so he watched her with concern, wondering if she was suffering from a nightmare. In the depths of her sleep, Lydia's memory returned to those dark moments, and she found herself kneeling in a cold, desolate cell. Richard appeared before the iron bars, his face cold, and curtly assured her that he would not kill her. Despite Lydia's tear-streaked face, Richard reminded her that attempting to murder the future empress and the heir to the throne in her womb was a heinous crime that could not be forgiven. However, he added that she had once been engaged to him, which had saved him when he was just a prince, so now that he was the emperor, he would repay the favor by sparing her life. Lydia reached out a trembling hand to him from behind the bars, pleadingly whispering his name, Richard, but he cut her off with a bone-chilling coldness, declaring that their accounts were settled. He sternly left her with an ultimatum, demanding that she act wisely from now on, and stressing that sparing her life was the last mercy he could offer her. Richard turned to leave, and Lydia screamed in terror, begging him not to go. She admitted her mistakes in a broken voice, clinging to the bars and crying for him to stay with her a little longer, expressing her intense fear of being left alone in that place. She collapsed to the ground, completely broken, and hysterically shouted his name. But Richard, naturally, continued to walk away without looking back. Lydia watched his retreating back, clutching her skirt tightly, and thought viciously of the bastard who, in that moment, wouldn't even spare her a final glance. Her expression shifted from brokenness to overwhelming rage, and she secretly vowed in her heart that she wouldn't kill him either. She cast a sharp, vengeful glare, swearing that rather than killing him, she would turn his life into a living hell, ensuring he could never live a day in peace again. Lydia murmured Richard's name in her sleep, begging him not to go, while Arson listened to her words with a complicated expression. He gave a bitter and sarcastic smile, muttering to himself that she had said she hated him before. He turned his back, thinking that no matter how much she hated him, a part of her must still be attached to him deep down. Suddenly, Arson felt a painful contraction, a strange sense of resentment squeezing his chest. He looked at her sleeping form, trying to convince himself that her feelings for the Emperor were absolutely none of his business. He clenched his fists tightly, wondering in confusion why this wild and uncontrollable emotion surged within him whenever he was near Lydia, whether in the valley before or in the capital now. Devon stood before his luxurious mansion, his face pale, terrified as he wondered if his father was on his way. His servant confirmed the news, explaining that a message had come from the checkpoint stating that the Marquis had indeed passed through the capital's outer walls. Devon stammered, asking about the white ghost sickness and whether his father had truly recovered, then frantically ordered the servant to move the coffin immediately as he was going out to greet his father. The Marquis arrived by carriage, and a servant helped him down. Devon ran to his father with open arms and a brilliant but fake smile, feigning great happiness and a warm welcome at seeing him. The Marquis looked at his son with a sharp and piercing gaze, so Devon asked if he had fully recovered from his illness, adding that it was hard to believe even seeing it with his own eyes. The Marquis called his name in a stern tone. Devon maintained a tense smile and replied with feigned politeness, "Yes, father." The Marquis looked directly at his son, Devon, and asked in a firm tone if he had really tried to register Giselle in the family registry. Devon smiled nervously, trying to salvage the situation, and began to stammer for an answer. Devon decided to change the subject, feigning concern for his father's health and suggesting they go inside the mansion, afraid the Marquis might collapse again. As they entered, Devon looked around nervously, thinking that it was a good thing the coffin had been moved, or it would have been big trouble if it were discovered. Devon tried to continue his act, suspiciously asking the butler if his father was really all right, as he didn't look very healthy. The butler cut off his doubts sharply, confirming that the Marquis was merely tired from the journey and that his illness was completely cured. The Marquis then interrupted him sternly, speaking directly to Devon and demanding he answer truthfully about registering Giselle. Sweat streamed down Devon's face as he forced a smile and admitted to his father in a faint voice that it was true. The Marquis's expression turned to anger and contempt, and he harshly asked his son if he had no self-respect. He sternly rebuked him, pointing out that his sister's position had been stolen, and not only did he not defend her, but he sided with the thief. Devon then tried to defend his position, saying the Emperor's will was firm and he had no choice. Devon continued his weak defense, claiming he had agreed to break the engagement for Lydia's sake, as she would suffer if she married a man who no longer loved her. Devon continued with growing confidence, saying that the Emperor had also given him a promise. The Marquis wondered in surprise what this promise was. A greedy glint shone in Devon's eyes as he proudly told his father that the Emperor had promised to grant him the title of Duke, thinking this would surely please his father. Suddenly, the Marquis grabbed a nearby pillow and slammed it hard on Devon's head, making him scream in pain and surprise. The Marquis looked at his son with utter contempt, describing him as a foolish child. The Marquis shouted angrily in his face, asserting that ambition had blinded his judgment and that this foolishness of his would bring ruin to the entire family bloodline. 2 days later, Arson, Lydia, and their party arrived safely in the snow-covered border region. Lydia walked through the village, carrying her luggage, surprised to notice the dilapidated state of the buildings, wondering why there was such destruction, even though she thought the flames of war had not reached the border during the coup. She looked around in shock, finding that not a single building had been spared. The night Cedric approached her, and she asked about the situation. So he regretfully explained that half of the knights had fled during the coup, leaving them unable to properly repel the monster attacks. Cedric smiled, rubbing his neck, and added optimistically that now that Commander Arson was back, they should be able to restore order. Lydia watched Arson's back, clearly realizing that he was an indispensable person for this border region. Meanwhile, the old retainers of the Byron family and the villagers gathered in a warm atmosphere. Lydia noticed the residents recognizing old Robert and deduced that he was likely one of the old servants of the Byron family. Lydia breathed a sigh of great relief, certain that no matter what happened, everyone here would be safe under Sir Arson's protection. She smiled with satisfaction, telling herself that she had achieved at least one worthy goal in this life. Lydia turned to Cedric and asked for the location of the temple. Cedric looked at her, shocked and bewildered, wondering if she really intended to live in the temple, to which she smiled and confirmed, saying that of course she was a priestess. Cedric, feeling awkward and hesitant, suddenly called over Randall and asked him to show the young lady the way, trying to escape the situation. Lydia was very surprised and shocked to see Randall, thinking irritably why it had to be him, describing the situation as extremely awkward. Randall coldly waved for her to follow him, and Lydia walked nervously behind him through the woods. Lydia stood before the abandoned temple, speechless at its miserable condition, even screaming in disbelief that the place was practically an old warehouse. She reached for the dilapidated wooden door, thinking that although she had heard it was in bad shape, the reality was much worse than she had imagined. She tried to lighten the mood with a nervous laugh, noticing that the door was locked, which meant it hadn't been used in a long time. Just as she was speaking, Randall stepped forward with a blank expression, told her to move aside, and then kicked the door open with immense force. Lydia stood frozen, breaking out in a cold sweat, telling herself in amazement that this man had just kicked open the temple gate. Randall turned his face to her and simply said the door was open, so Lydia thanked him with a very nervous smile. Randall then left abruptly, leaving Lydia looking confused. A full week passed, and Arson appeared in his office, buried in documents and work. His aide, Cedric, submitted a report to him about strangers roaming the area, explaining that they claimed to be wandering mercenaries but seemed to be affiliated with the Emperor's faction and were asking about Commander Arson. Arson decided to ignore them for the time being, confident that they wouldn't find anything no matter how much they searched. Arson hadn't left his office once all week, explaining to himself that he had no time to worry about those intruders. Arson worriedly asked Cedric if the strangers had approached the temple, pointing out that something could happen to Lydia, so Cedric replied that no reports mentioned it and that he would send Randall to check later. Arson was surprised at the specific choice of Randall, reminding Cedric that Randall and Lydia didn't get along well. Cedric laughed and explained that was in the past. They got along fine now, and Randall even helped with repairs. Arson's expression grew suspicious and surprised, wondering how the godless Randall could be frequenting the temple. Arson suddenly stood up from his chair and told Cedric he was going to the temple to see for himself, which surprised his aide. Arson arrived at the temple and found Lydia sitting in the garden, and she called his name in surprise. Lydia asked if he was looking for Priest Byron, telling him the priest was currently away. Arson denied it, explaining he was just here to check on the place. Lydia mentioned that thanks to hard work and people's help, the temple looked much more decent now. Lydia enthusiastically praised Randall, describing him as amazing, able to do everything from carpentry to cleaning. Arson listened to this with a displeased expression. Lydia was surprised by Arson's silent reaction, secretly wondering if he was pretending not to know, and confirmed in her mind that Randall had definitely helped her. Lydia recalled how she had thanked Randall earlier, and how he had turned his head, blushing, and replied that the quick completion was thanks to her. She also remembered how he had stammered to justify his help, claiming he only did it because Commander Arson had ordered him to. Returning to the present, Lydia looked at Arson, thinking that Randall probably said that because he was too shy to boast. She thought with a satisfied smile that Cedric was right. Arson really was an innocent boy. Arson noticed Lydia looking at him and asked in surprise why she was staring, so Lydia denied it and tried to salvage the situation. Lydia seized the opportunity to ask if she could ask him for a small favor. Lydia's expression had brightened since they met, and she spoke excitedly about the lilies of the valley and the forest, a symbol of the goddess, asking for his permission to bring some back to plant in the temple courtyard. Arson realized this was the favor she wanted to ask, and, considering the danger of going alone, offered to accompany her to the forest. Lydia politely tried to refuse, pointing out that he was busy and there was no need to trouble him, and that she would go later with Priest Byron. But Arson firmly cut her off, rejecting the idea of her going later, as he was sure she would say that now, and then sneak off as soon as he was gone. Lydia wondered in surprise how he knew what she was thinking, but Arson interrupted her thoughts, warning her to watch out for the slippery slope and helping her down. He carefully extended his hand to her, and Lydia took it to cross the rocky slope safely. Arson continued to hold her hand to help her until her feet were on level ground. Upon arriving at their destination, Lydia's eyes widened in amazement at the beauty of the place. She pointed with childlike excitement at the field of flowers stretching before them, drawing Arson's attention to how lush and beautiful they were. Suddenly, Arson stopped, his expression focused as he stared into the woods, which terrified Lydia, who thought a monster had appeared, and she pointed behind him, trembling and stammering in fear. Arson calmly turned to see what she was pointing at, then coolly told her that the muscular behemoth in front of them was not a monster, but just a winter rabbit, which left Lydia utterly surprised and shocked. Lydia suddenly remembered him comparing her to a winter rabbit before, and Arson admitted it very calmly. Lydia was furious, mentally comparing her own appearance to this muscular, intimidating rabbit, completely rejecting the comparison and wondering if she looked like a monster in his eyes. Arson nervously tried to defend himself, explaining that the rabbit's fur was only thick and cute in the winter, and now that it was spring, its shape had changed. But Lydia refused to listen to his excuses, shouting that he was a liar. Arson decided to end the futile argument, assuring her that it wasn't a monster anyway, and there was no need to worry, while she stood there with her arms crossed in annoyance. Suddenly, Arson's expression turned serious as he realized he had almost forgotten the real reason he came here. He asked her seriously if any men claiming to be mercenaries had come see her. Lydia, holding a shovel, confirmed it, wondering in surprise how he knew about it. Even though they had just left, Arson revealed their true identity as scouts affiliated with the Emperor, assuring her he would drive them away soon, but advising her to be extremely cautious. Lydia expressed her concern that forcibly driving them away might arouse suspicion that they were hiding something at the border. She pondered the dire consequences, realizing that if suspicion fell on Arson, Richard might openly send troops, and if any of them recognized the followers of the Duchy of Byron hiding here, disaster would strike. Lydia told him it would be better to make them leave on their own, but the challenge was how to prompt them to do so. Lydia, holding her shovel, proposed a bold and surprising idea in a firm tone, to create a romantic scandal among the scouts. Arson was utterly shocked, his face turning red with embarrassment, unable to comprehend what she was saying. Lydia slyly explained her plan, suggesting they spread a rumor that she was pursuing him and he wasn't interested in her, to avoid any exaggeration that could backfire, thinking this level of drama would be sufficient. Arson remained silent, dumbfounded, while Lydia asserted that the scouts would be eager to relay this trivial news. Back to the capital immediately. Lydia smiled confidently, asserting that acting as she once had towards Richard would work, because if the Emperor heard she was obsessively pursuing Arson, he would lose interest in the border and sympathize with Arson. When Arson worriedly suggested the Emperor might recall her to the capital to quell the rumors, Lydia held up a finger, completely dismissing the possibility with full confidence. She explained to him that doing so would make people think the Emperor still had feelings for the former fiancée he had abandoned. She pointed out that Richard, who had ascended to the throne through a coup and immediately broke off his engagement after his coronation, had a shaky and unstable image. She added that his current desperate need for public support would prevent him from getting entangled in messy rumors with the daughter of the Marquis, who was one of his biggest supporters. Lydia finished her speech with a bright smile, thinking it was a well-thought-out plan, and asked for his opinion. Arson stared at her for a moment before reluctantly agreeing. Arson seriously emphasized to Lydia that this plan must remain a secret buried forever between the two of them. He added with a grave expression that if they decide to do this, she must be fully committed and execute it completely and correctly. Lydia agreed with a cheerful laugh, then joked that she would prepare and visit his mansion so frequently that she would wear out his doorstep. Arson looked at her with an annoyed side eye, thinking she's starting with those provocative words again, and told her that executing the plan would be much easier if she had just agreed to live in the mansion from the beginning. Lydia slyly asked why he was so eager to have her in his mansion and warned him that if others heard such insistence, they might think he was flirting, which made him jump in alarm. Lydia laughed, holding her shovel, saying she knew the truth and there was no need to deny it, describing him as hopelessly innocent. Arson tried to retort, stammering a denial of the innocent comment, but Lydia suddenly cut him off, excitedly pointing to a field full of flowers. Lydia ran towards the flowers, leaving Arson behind, who watched her back with a serene expression. He watched her run through the flowers, thinking with amazement that the Emperor would actually be afraid of this woman. He wondered in confusion what the Emperor could have possibly found in a personality as bright and sunny as hers that would make him feel tired and frustrated. He put a hand to his face, secretly admitting to himself that watching her linger by his side made her seem even more charming and lovely in his eyes. He remembered his earlier words to her about having to stick to the plan and honestly realized in his heart that he didn't really need to add that condition so sternly. He confessed to himself that there were other ways to deal with the scouts, but he didn't want to refuse her plan because he simply didn't mind spending time with her in this way. As dusk fell, Lydia and Arson arrived at the temple gate, and she thanked him with a warm smile for the escort. Lydia held up a finger to remind him that he must stick to the plan, saying he couldn't act so kind anymore because she was the one who was supposed to be pursuing him. Arson turned his head away with a stiff face, replying that what he did wasn't pursuit, but strict and precise surveillance. Lydia asked him to cooperate for their common goal, even if it slightly broke the plan, so Arson briefly agreed, saying he would try. Before leaving, Lydia suddenly thanked him for sending Sir Randall to help, and Arson stopped in surprise at the name. Lydia explained. She knew he was the one who sent him to help clean the temple, and she had heard everything just now. Arson was shocked to realize that Randall, that rascal, had come on his own accord and used him as an excuse. Lydia laughed happily, thinking Arson was trying to hide his kindness out of shyness, but she still expressed her desire to thank him. Arson seriously considered whether he should correct the misunderstanding and tell her that Randall had lied and he hadn't sent him. But he hesitated, covering his mouth, not wanting to expose the truth for some reason. So he decided to leave silently, bidding her farewell. Arson left the temple, noticing it was already late and evening had set in, even though he had told Cedric he would be back soon. He walked absent-mindedly, thinking about the wonderful irony of their plan. He pretended to push Lydia away, while she pretended to admire and pursue him. Arson talked to himself as he walked, while Lydia stood in the garden, both of them wondering if they could really pull off this act. Lydia's memory drifted back to the past, specifically to the day of her social debut, which happened to be the anniversary of her mother's death. Lydia stood alone in the moonlight with tears in her eyes, thinking she couldn't force herself to smile and have fun when her mind was full of memories of her mother. Suddenly, she heard a movement behind her. A young Prince Richard appeared, curiously asking why Miss Ivancheva was here. Lydia hastily wiped away her tears and told him in a broken, sad voice that she missed her mother very much. Lydia's vision returned to the past, where Richard stood before her on that moonlit night, offering her a handkerchief to wipe her tears. He told her in a warm tone that it wasn't shameful to cry and that he understood her feelings very well. He gave her a reassuring smile. As she stood before him with teary eyes, he shyly confessed to her that although it was embarrassing, he revealed that he also missed his late mother. Lydia remembered that moment clearly, and the embarrassment and weakness she felt then, but she now realized that those words were the key that made her heart lean towards Richard. Lydia sadly asked herself in her heart if that moment was the beginning of her falling into his trap. Tears streamed down with the memories as she reviewed fragments of her memory. After that day, she began to frequent the third prince's palace, witnessing the rumors about their relationship spreading among the servants who saw these frequent visits. A series of painful events flashed before her eyes. The engagement, then the betrayal, the broken engagement, imprisonment, and finally, time rewound. Lydia snapped back to reality, angrily tearing apart that mental image. Realizing it wasn't a happy memory worth reliving, she decided to use the same method that got her into trouble in the past. But this time, she would be the one in control, determined to display her affection openly and exaggeratedly. She clenched her fist with determination, deciding that starting tomorrow, she would make people notice her supposed obsession with Arson. The next day, Lydia walked beside Arson in the marketplace, noticing the whispers and stares of the people, and she asked him with a smile if something was wrong. He looked troubled. Arson sighed in frustration and told her they had been scammed again in Count Mont's territory. He angrily pointed to the grain sacks, explaining that the merchants were selling grain worth 1 gold coin for 10, which left Lydia utterly shocked. Lydia suggested they should immediately go and confront the scammers, but Milan hesitated for some reason. Milan explained the problem to Lydia, stating that it was difficult to transport food to the border by land because monsters were sensitive to the smell of grain and attacked the caravans, and the only place to buy food was in the Count's province. Across the river, he added that the merchants even refused to sell seeds or seedlings for planting, making it nearly impossible to acquire them. Lydia realized these merchants were taking advantage of the situation, knowing the border knights couldn't challenge them, and she bit her thumb, thinking about this greedy exploitation and wondering if the Count was aware. Malin clarified to Lydia through a night that the Count had been living in the capital, but the agent managing the province must know what was happening. Lydia was surprised to learn about Count Mont being in the capital, as she didn't recall seeing his face there before. Lydia cleverly deduced that if he didn't show up at the high society gatherings she attended, he was unlikely to be from a prominent family, and in short, his influence was far less than that of a marquis's family. A rebellious glint appeared in her eyes as she decided it was time for Miss Evangeline, the daughter of a marquis, to step forward, not the humble priestess. Lydia turned to the knights with a bright and enthusiastic smile, asking who wanted to accompany her to Count Mont's territory to cause a ruckus and put on a good show. A few days later, Lydia was in a carriage heading to the province, expressing her surprise to Arson, who was sitting opposite her, saying she didn't expect him to come along in person. Arson sat solemnly and calmly, listening to her. He explained to her seriously that it would be troublesome if something happened to her alone in a strange land, adding that her father, the Marquis, would be very angry if he found out. Lydia laughed cheerfully, reminding him that she wouldn't be alone since other knights were accompanying her. Arson stood his ground, explaining that the province had very poor security due to many merchant ships, mercenaries, and smuggling activities, so it was the safe option to accompany her, and warned her to be careful upon arrival. Lydia yawned nonchalantly, assuring him she wouldn't wander around alone. Then she smiled slyly and added in a teasing tone that Marquis Randall also seemed very eager to come, but it was a pity he couldn't make it, which made Arson flinch in disgust at the sarcastic title. Arson remembered when Lydia loudly asked the knights who wanted to accompany her for the show she planned. Everyone had raised their hands with great enthusiasm, including Randall, who had slipped in from behind, and Lydia had cheered happily at the positive interaction. Arson decided to organize the group heading to the Count's province, explaining that it would be difficult for everyone to leave the border at once, so only a few would go. He pointed to his men, choosing his second-in-command, Cedric, and 3 others to accompany them on the mission. He turned to them seriously, announcing that the 4 of them and he would set out together to put the plan into action. Arson returned to the reality of the carriage and started to scold himself internally, thinking it was unnecessary to call them out by name. He felt embarrassed by his actions, asking himself if this precise selection method seemed too childish to his subordinates. He continued his self-reflection, wondering worriedly if Randall had noticed his strange behavior, then paused and dismissed the thought, asking himself in surprise what Randall would even notice. Lydia interrupted his chaotic thoughts by asking about the list she had asked him to prepare earlier. Arson regained his composure, pulled out a scroll, and told her it was ready, and Lydia thanked him as she reached for it. Lydia unrolled the scroll and was startled by its surprising length, which extended all the way to the floor, making her marvel at the number of requests. Arson explained that the list was so long because there were many things to buy, stating that this frequency was unusual and was due to the severe damage from repelling monster attacks during his absence. Lydia smiled confidently, folded the list, and assured him it was no problem, as they had enough funds to cover the costs. she suddenly showed Arson a bag of sparkling diamonds, proudly presenting them before him. Lydia laughed happily, telling him it was too early to be surprised because she had more up her sleeve. She pulled a nightgown from her bag and presented it to him, while Arson looked on, shocked and embarrassed by the sight. Lydia explained slyly that this was her father's emergency fund hidden in the Marquis's mansion, and she had sewed the money and diamonds into the fabric to smuggle it out without her brother Devon knowing, maliciously noting that she told him it was expensive underwear to divert suspicion. Arson's cheeks turned red with embarrassment, and he covered his mouth while Lydia continued, saying she had to tear the rest of the fabric to get what was inside. Arson asked if she was tired, and she said she was a little, having stayed up late the previous night doing this. Arson looked at her with a mix of nervousness and embarrassment, then held out his hand for her to give him the fabric, offering to finish the task himself. Lydia was surprised and tried to object, but he cut her off seriously, telling her to go to sleep as she would need her full energy for the show she was planning in the province tomorrow. Lydia smiled gratefully and accepted his offer, saying she would close her eyes for a bit and thanked him using the title Marquis, telling him she wouldn't say anything even if he skimmed one or two for himself, but he told her he would never do that. Lydia lay down and quickly fell asleep, while Arson watched her peaceful, sleeping face. Arson sat alone in the carriage, holding the fabric and unpicking it to remove the diamonds, desperately putting his hand to his head and thinking, what on earth am I doing? The group finally arrived at Wan Province, and the buildings and streets looked more prosperous than they had anticipated. Lydia strolled through the market streets, noticing inns, restaurants, and even farmland, thinking with surprise that only a river separated this province from the border. Yet the living conditions were completely different. She told herself this province was a small but hidden gem and wondered how Count Mont could possess this level of wealth when she had never heard of him before. She thought it didn't matter for now and called for the merchant Milan. Re-energized, Lydia smiled confidently and suggested they head to the shops first to begin their plan. Lydia decided that for a full week, she would revert to her role as the infamous daughter of the Marquis. Lydia, the spoiled, selfish, and stubborn girl. She explained the details of the plan, which relied on showing off and squandering money, and spreading rumors that she was still financially supported by the Marquis's family. She added, she would pretend to be an ignorant and spoiled girl, deliberately letting the merchants cheat her by buying things at double the price. She asserted excitedly that once word reached the agent in charge that she had appeared, she would cause a huge sensation and drag him out for a confrontation. Lydia hummed happily as she left the shop, thinking that having Sir Arson by her side and following her would make the act much easier to perform. Lydia walked beside Arson, thinking that treating him like an attendant and dragging him along would make her seem completely immature, which would help spread the rumor that she was madly in love with him. She added, the first step to carrying this out was proper clothes, and one of the knights described the place to her as the best shop in the province. Lydia excitedly announced the start of spoiled young lady mode and asked them to go inside, while her expression shifted to one of arrogance and confidence. Lydia suddenly stopped to look at her shoes, then turned to a confused Arson, who had no idea what was going on. She whispered a request for him to change his facial expression to look like someone who had been dragged here against his will, and Arson was surprised by the request. She approached him and whispered sternly that she was asking him to subtly show that he hated everything she was doing. When Lydia saw he was unable to act, she sighed in resignation and told him to just keep a blank face if it was too difficult for him. The shop door opened, and the staff welcomed them warmly. Lydia demanded a priestess's robe from the staff, who politely apologized, explaining that they didn't make priestess robes in their shop. The employee smiled regretfully and suddenly froze, her eyes widening in shock as she stared at Lydia, because someone told her this was the daughter of Marquis Ivancheva. The employee's mind flashed with the rumor she had heard about the Marquis's daughter becoming a priestess and going to the border, wondering in surprise why she had suddenly appeared in this province. The employee screamed internally with shock and confusion, while Lydia put on a displeased expression and asked sharply if she didn't make clothes for priestesses. The employee hastily denied it. The employee quickly grasped the situation and tried to salvage it with flattery, loudly saying that of course they would be happy to make the robes, as long as the priestess herself had graced them with her presence. As the female employees stood obediently, Lydia thought with displeasure about what they must think of her, deciding she must order at least 3 sets to assert her status. The staff began to praise Lydia's taste, confirming that this was the best shop around and suggesting they start by choosing the fabric, while the employees showed different samples. Lydia examined the fabrics with a scrutinizing gaze. She coldly rejected one fabric, saying it was for wedding dresses, and demanded it be removed immediately, causing the employee to panic. She criticized another cloth for being too yellow, skillfully playing the role of a difficult customer. Her choice finally landed on a specific fabric, and she coldly declared it acceptable. The employee applauded with exaggerated enthusiasm, praising the young lady's sharp eye and refined taste. The employee turned to Arson and the disguised knights, condescendingly explaining to them that this fabric was imported and was the most expensive of all the fabrics shown. She began to describe the design she wanted, suggesting some lace on the sleeves for beauty and some frills around the neck. Lydia anxiously wondered if this was too much for a priestess, worrying that people would talk about her extravagance. But the employee convinced her that adding a little detail wouldn't be noticed by anyone. Lydia asked, in a loud and lively voice, for pearls to be embroidered around the collar for elegance, while the employee continued to praise her extraordinary taste. The employees took measurements around Lydia, while she happily thought that she had never thought about this so deeply before, but she thought the result would look very high class. Lydia confidently asked if a week was enough time to finish the work. The employee enthusiastically confirmed they would have it ready as soon as possible. Suddenly, the employee naively asked about the maid accompanying Lydia, pointing out that personal maids usually handle payments, which put Lydia in a bind. Lydia was suddenly reminded of her real situation and thought in surprise about a maid, realizing the fatal flaw in her act. The employee sweated and became very confused when Lydia told her that a priestess couldn't wander around with a personal maid, and the employees started to stammer, looking for a way out. Lydia muttered to herself sarcastically, realizing that no priestess in her right mind would embroider pearls on a religious robe in such an extravagant way. As she got lost in her role, Arson watched her from behind with an appreciative smile, admitting to himself that her skill in playing the ignorant and naive girl forced into the priesthood was amazing. Suddenly, Lydia turned to the employee and pretended to be displeased, asking why she would need a maid in the first place, putting everyone in an awkward position. Lydia signaled to Arson with a subtle hand gesture to bail her out. Arson wondered to himself if Lydia was asking him to pay now. Arson stepped forward and placed a huge diamond in the employee's hand as payment, and the employee's eyes went wide as she screamed in shock, unable to believe they were paying for 3 robes with a single diamond. Lydia asked with false innocence and indifference if there was a problem with the payment. The employee hastily denied it, stammering from immense joy and screaming internally that she had hit the jackpot. Lydia left with a sly smile, thinking that paying far more than required would ensure that by tomorrow, rumors of a rich, naive, and gullible girl's arrival would have spread. Indeed, her plan worked perfectly. As the moment she stepped out, shopkeepers from the area started flocking to her, and although she was happy about the plan's success, exhaustion began to set in. Lydia walked down the street, surrounded by knights carrying large bags, and she complained internally that walking so much had completely exhausted her. Walking became a heavy burden for Lydia, so she decided to take the opportunity, using the presence of those around her, to move on to the next part of her plan. She suddenly feigned dizziness and weakness, letting out a faint scream to get Arson's attention, who looked at her questioningly. Lydia sat on the ground with a dramatic performance, complaining loudly about her sore legs and extreme fatigue, then boldly asked Arson to carry her. Lydia smirked internally, expecting him to refuse her request with a stern and harsh expression in front of everyone to complete his role as the cold guard who despised her. But surprise left her speechless when Arson immediately bent down and lifted her into his arms with ease. Arson looked at her with a worried yet serious expression, asking with concern if she was very tired. Lydia stammered, her face turning red with shyness and shock. She screamed internally that this kind and considerate act was not part of her plan at all.